It's the story of how one day the apocalypse happened. A couple years later, most ordinary guy, who was a loser with no power, one day got the system and began to raise his level until he became a supreme hunter. This is a great retelling, so be sure to like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment if you liked the story. Our story begins in Seoul, Korea. It was an ordinary day. People were going to work. Women were chatting in cafes. Nothing threatened this beautiful day. But suddenly one of the women received a terrible message on her phone. It was an emergency alert from the Department of National Defense. At first, the woman thought it was just some evil prank, but then the messages started coming in on all the phones and the public alert system, the public address systems. People were frightened, and suddenly a purple portal opened in the sky from which a terrible monster emerged. Timeskeep. It's been 2 weeks since the gate appeared in our world. The government is taking all possible measures, and the heads of all countries have gathered in the United States to think of a plan. But even though the government tried to reassure the people, the reality was not so good. Soldiers. The soldiers attacked the monsters to clear the building, but the bullets didn't hurt the monsters. Soldier Kim shoot them. But the monsters didn't retreat, and there was an explosion. It was a grenade that stunned the commander. He was called by a soldier to see for himself something terrible. The commander was frightened. He noticed that the monster, even without a head, was still moving. The commander didn't expect it to be so difficult, but that was just the beginning of the ordeal. But it was only the beginning of the ordeal. The message was sent over all the lines of communication that the military had been defeated, and the new order was to retreat. In the next scene, we see a United States airplane with the president himself on board. "Mr. President, we just got this footage. Impossible." It was a huge red dragon, no weapon, not even a nuclear weapon could save the day. The room was in chaos, but suddenly a gate opened on board. But it wasn't a monster. It was a man. "Who are you?" "I'm a monster from the Space Multidimensional Federation, and I have a great offer for you," said this guy. "What if I give your world the power to resist these monsters? But in return, your land must join our federation." The president instantly accepts the offer. "Then we can start the game," the guy said cheerfully, pulling out a glowing yellow cube. 28 years have passed since then. We see a ruined city in the midst of a brutal battle. "Hey, Likan Ele, hold the line. We must not interfere with the hunters. The cost of a mistake would be too great. Hunters are people who have been awakened by the Force, people who can fight monsters. 28 years ago, the monsters invaded the Earth. People were already suppressed, but a man from the Space Federation appeared, and then awakened people appeared all over the world. These people were called hunters. Our whole planet was able to unite to save mankind. The man who gave people power went back and gave people a 30-year trial period. It was the time of my father's generation. It was 28 years ago, but I am not concerned. I am a simple porter. My name is Likan Ele. We see a hunter girl charging a fireball and attacking the monster with it. Another hunter tried to kill the monster, but suddenly it grabbed it with its long tail. The hunters did not understand why they did not, but Likan Ele knew that silver lizards have a defense against fire. They really don't know such basic things. "Even I know about it," said Likan Ele. "They call themselves hunters with 2 years of experience." But suddenly, the monster began to increase in size, which terrified the group. The monster began to charge the attack with pure energy. A huge beam of light shot at the men, but the reinforced soldier reflected it with his heavy shield. Then the assistant started shooting at the lizard, and another hunter took advantage of the moment to attack the monster. But that didn't work either. The monster raised its head and started screaming very loudly. Then one of the helpers accidentally hit the monster in its weak spot. But it didn't do any damage but made the monster very angry, making the situation even worse. The monster started chasing the hunter's helper, but the hunter was in no hurry to help him. He said it's part of their job, and they changed them a few at a time. The battlefield is a dangerous place. They knew where they were going. Likan Ele was furious at these words. "They are scum, not hunters. I'll figure it out. Where was its weak point? The neck or a little lower? Can I hit it?" But there was no time to think. The monster was about to eat his friend, so he said to Likan Ele and fired. He made the lizard run after him. "Why did I do that? But I saved my friend. It's worth it. It's a shame that my power hasn't awakened. I can't do anything about it, but I have to think. And these hunters are just a bunch of fools." The hunters just stood there watching the lizard run after him, and they weren't going to help him. I knew it. They're just awful. If this keeps up, I won't survive. I can't even physically do anything to it. I need another way. And then Lee Kan-ele noticed the wire pole and realized what he had to do. He turned around, and with only one chance, he shot at the wire while the lizard was underneath it. It hit the pole, and it fell right on the lizard, but it was still able to attack with its tail, and Lee Kan-ele was on the verge. But suddenly it just disappeared, and a strange girl from the Space Federation appeared in front of him. "Hey, Mr. Lee Kan-ele, open your eyes." He opened his eyes, but he found himself in a different place. He thought the lizard had thrown him off with its tail. "I think I'm still softly squirming." "Right, Lee Kan-ele, you're right," said a voice in his head. "What is it?" "I'm not crazy from the blow. I'm hearing a voice in my head." "No, Mr. Lee Kan-ele, you're fine." The protagonist started to panic, but the voice in his head calmed him down because the monster was still around. The voice explained to him that this monster's level is much higher than yours, so if you fight it, you'll lose. "What are you suggesting? That I just surrender and get eaten by the monster?" "No. I've been imprisoned for 10,000 years. I don't want it to end so quickly. I'll give you a special power." Lee Kan-ele was very surprised and took the knife that was lying near him, and then he received a temporary gift. He noticed a sign in front of him where he had only 45 seconds to defeat the monster. He quickly realized and started attacking the monster. The monster moves as before. "I have 20 seconds left." He had 5 seconds left, and he managed to hit the lizard's weak spot. It was a victory, and he was happy. "Lee Kan-ele, you have successfully completed your first hunt. Congratulations. We'll consider you trained." "Training? What are you talking about?" Lee Kan-ele was surprised. "I forgot to introduce myself. From now on, I am your ego, Mr. Lee Kan-ele. My name is Kabis. Congratulations on your awakening. The awakened are the people endowed with mana, a power beyond the imagination of human beings, and this is how I became awakened." Lee Kan-ele couldn't believe it, "So I have to think rationally. But what just happened? Can it be called that?" The commander came running to Lee Kan-ele. "Hey, are you alive?" "What?" He was shocked by what he saw. But no matter how you look at it, it all happened in reality, thought Lee Kan-ele. The hunter said, "Why would a normal guy kill a monster with such a small knife?" "Wait, didn't we catch it and this guy just killed it?" said the girl hunter. "Hey man, we beat him, right? These guys are one and the same? They're scum." No complaints," said Lee Kan-ele. That's what the satisfied hunter said. Lee Kan-ele was very angry with the hunters. "I risked my life and saved a man, while they threw us out there as bait for that monster." "Hey, Lee Kan-ele, I understand you very well. It's not the first time these hunters have behaved like this," said the commander of the auxiliaries. But he started laughing at the Kabis, and Lee Kan-ele noticed that no one else could see her but him. Soon the car arrived. The guys started unloading it, and the load was very heavy. "What is this?" Kan-ele asked Kabis. "It's an executioner's outfit," he answered. "They cut off pieces of monsters to study them. They do it all for money, so they can sell them for more money." Lee Kan-ele took the job, which shocked Kabis. It took a long time, and the guy was very tired. But a sign suddenly appeared in front of him. The lizard monster was successfully defeated completely, rank A. For this, Lee Kan-ele received the F-rank skill, Executioner. It was payday, and the hunters went home. Lee Kan-ele was angry at his small salary. The squad leader noticed that all of his salary had been spent, all the money Lee Kan-ele gave to his father to cover his hospital debts. "Why don't the other family members help you?" "My mom and my younger sister left the family. Since then, I only have my father, so I don't think about money, but about my father, who is in the hospital." That really touched the commander. "I knew you were a good man. Now call me Thetsu." He even drove him home. The commander's a good man, but he's too sticky. Lee Kan-ele was going to go to his second job, but he remembered that he forgot his Kabis. But she showed up right next to him, which scared him. "How did you get here? You can consider me a part of you, and I'll always be here. So now you'll always be there for me?" "Yes, in other words, I'm your assistant." "What's wrong with that?" "Of course," Lee Kan shouted loudly. "You always show up and scare me, and people think I'm talking to myself. Goodbye to my personal life." "And happy days," thought Lee Kan. "Hey, what do you mean happy days?" "Hey, Kabis, can you read my mind?" the guy asked in a frightened tone. "Of course I can," replied Kabis. "Hey, can you do that?" "No," replied Kabis. Hey, Lee Khan, let's test your powers. Just say the word, state. A game window appeared in front of him, listing his characteristics. He was a normal. He was a level 1 guy with an emphasis on strength and agility. Magic and luck were weak. There was also a skill listed, Kabis' defense. If you think about it, no one knows how the awakening happens, even though it's been so long. Someone gets mana on the battlefield, someone during the study, or even from birth. No one can give an answer to how it all happens. Usually an awakened person has one of 3 abilities. You're either a hunter of monsters, or you're the one who creates weapons for them. So far I only have 2 abilities, Kabis and Executioner. Lee Khan asked Kabis a question. I'm not a unique hunter by any chance. You're a fast learner, she replied. Subscribe to the channel, thank you. What? I can't believe it's so rare in this country. We call them Thunderbeam. So everything I got is thanks to you? Yes, answered Kabis. If you compare. When people wake up, they get a house. You got the bricks, and it's up to you how you become a hunter to build a fortress instead of a house. Lee Khan came to his second job. Kabis told him to just keep doing what he was doing and level up. But his boss interrupted him and said, Hey, Lee Khan, if you don't work, you won't get any money. Lee Khan noticed strange lines on the animals, all thanks to his executioner skill. This was the most convenient way to get the job done. Lee Khan called for Kabis, but she came late. It turned out that people like her were asleep too. This skill helped him do the job 3 times faster than usual. But unexpectedly, Lee Khan pulled out a magic stone from a monster, which is worth 1,000,001. With such loot, the more he worked with the knife, the sharper it became, thanks to the skill. He improved his sword skill. Not even 2 hours after the start of his shift, he had already finished all his work. The manager started to scold him for not working, but Lee Khan explained to him that he had already finished his shift, which made him surprised. As long as I control my mana, people won't know I'm awake. Lee Khan was about to go home, but he was stopped by an angry boss. You're just walking around instead of working? Did you do all the work? Yes, boss, answered Lee Khan, which puzzled him. He didn't believe him, but Lee Khan quickly ran off to see the albatross. It was already dark outside, and the protagonist returned home. It's so good. I haven't finished work so early in a long time. Lee Khan. He thought he should finish his work at the factory, but a message on his phone reminded him of his debts, and he decided to stay and work. Suddenly, there was a knock at his door. It was his neighbor. It was his roommate who told him to be quiet because she had an important exam. Lee Khan apologized and went home to study. Lee Khan couldn't sleep. Too many emotions in one day, he called Kabis. She wasn't happy that he was keeping her awake, she joked. You ask me so many questions like, I'm your ex. What do you want to know? Listen, the other hunters can use mana. When do I do it too? Lee Khan asked. You have too few points. Level up and I'll tell you everything, replied Kabis. But you can try it yourself. Close your eyes and feel the mana. Imagine that you're the trunk of a tree. Then imagine that the nutrients are going to the roots. A blob of energy appeared in the guy's hands. It's smaller than I thought, said Kabis. Lee Khan got the mana control skill. You're still weak, but with points or training, you can increase your strength. Then I'll practice all night, shouted Lee Khan. But he woke up his neighbor again. The next day, he went to the factory again. But when he saw that Lee Khan was doing everything honestly, he was shocked. Lee Khan quickly ran home. He ate and practiced at the same time. His apartment was in a sad state. He was eating and watching a sports match. But he had an idea. He called Kabis and asked her if he could give objects his mana, to which she answered positively. Even a stone can be made stronger by pouring his mana into it. At night, Lee Khan went out to practice. He filled a stone with mana and threw it at a jar. The impact was so strong that it broke even the wood. He kept throwing the stone all night until he got tired. Kabis told him to rest, but he didn't want to listen to her. She warned him of the bad consequences. But he didn't stop until he got a new skill, a crushing blow. He was happy and wanted to continue his training, but suddenly he started to lose consciousness. When he opened his eyes, Kabis reminded him that she had warned him about the consequences of using too much mana. Only then did Lee Khan agree to go home. He was walking home on a dark street and heard strange sounds. It was robbers in the alley who wanted to kidnap a girl. Lee Khan usually avoided such situations, but he noticed that it was his neighbor. He mustered up the courage to stand up for the girl. Hey, let's throw her in the car, said one of the robbers. But suddenly Lee Khan threw a rock at one of them and knocked him down. But the second robber had a knife and was much more dangerous. Then Lee Khan took a chain and gave it Mana to grab the robber and disarm him. Lee Khan noticed that he became stronger on a physical level. He could handle bad people. "Hey, schoolgirl, are you okay?" Lee Khan asked her. She cried and hugged him in gratitude. Lee Khan took the robbers to the police, where they didn't believe he stopped two armed men with his bare hands. The officer asked, but Lee Khan said he was just practicing sports. He left the police station satisfied, but a girl suddenly jumped on him from behind. "Let's go home together." "No problem, UB," he said. He walked her home safely and noticed that she was a strong and positive girl. When he sat down on the bed to rest, he noticed a piece of paper in his pocket. A piece of paper. "Call me if you get bored." Lee Khan appreciated it and seemed to fall in love with her too. Lee Khan asked Kabis to show him his skills. He noticed that he had moved up to the second level and also discovered a new skill, coercion. He was surprised, but the next day he had a day off at the factory and decided to go to the martial arts hall, where he met his captain, who was starting to worry about him. He asked how his father was doing and asked him to give him his best wishes for his recovery, to which Lee Khan responded positively. Lee Khan began to train hard, which earned him the skill of improved physical strength, which only took him 3 hours. Lee Khan went to the hospital to visit his father. He talked to the nurse, but suddenly he got a message from the people he owed money to. "I gave them everything. What do they want?" thought Lee Khan. He went to the room where he saw his father sleeping. He realized that he didn't have much time left. His father's sleep time was getting shorter and shorter. When he sleeps 24 hours a day, he won't be able to open his eyes anymore. Lee Khan decided to leave early today because he had a lot of things to do. He wanted to save his father, but just standing and looking at him would not help. Lee Khan asked the nurse if he could cure his father with magic. "Yes, but only awakened people can do it, and it costs a lot," she said. "Thank you, everything will be fine. Just keep healing my father." He decided to look for information on the internet, but the computer wouldn't turn on, so he got angry and used special magic to make it work. He found some information and called Kabis. "Can I learn the skill of healing?" he asked. "You can try, but I'm not sure," she replied. "But even if you get the skill and know how to use it, you're too weak to use it. To use it, you need to level up." When Lee Khan was sleeping, someone knocked on the door. It was early morning. He opened the door but saw no one, but there was a can of banana milk on the ground. And a note. A thank you note from Khan Yubi. Lee Khan was happy to receive such a gift, but he had to go to work. He had to help the monster hunters today, so he got all the ammunition. But he was suddenly approached personally by the company manager, who hinted that if he messed up the equipment again like on the last job, he would be fired, but your safety was more important, so come back to us alive. He arrived at the place, and the monster hunt begins. The connection in the cell phone started to disappear. It meant that they are already close. "As you know, today our enemy is huge dogs," the commander said. "Be very careful. They are fast and strong. First we lure them to us, and then the hunters do their job. Is it clear that we are the bait?" Lee Khan thought. But he noticed that they're working with these terrible hunters again. One of the hunters was a little scared. He was afraid of the strong monsters. "Well, then we'll start hunting," said the commander, and fired a flare into the sky. The monsters noticed it and ran towards our squad. The helpers started shooting at the monsters and waited for the hunters to make their move. And they did. But the monsters turned out to be, and the girl hunter didn't even have time to use magic in the battle. But the commander suspected something strange. It was too easy victory. Then Lee Khan was a little scared, because he used the reinforced bullets. They were able to defeat the monsters so easily. But luckily no one noticed. He was afraid that people would find out about his awakening. 20 minutes before the fight, Lee Khan decided to try to give the bullets mana to increase their damage. But he not only loaded his machine gun with reinforced bullets, but also the whole squad was reinforced. And as a result of this adventure, he gained experience for all monsters. He even managed to raise his level. Then they had to do their main job, to clear the area of monster bodies. They were very tired because they had defeated a lot of monsters in this way. But Lee Khan, he got a new level again. Now he was a level 4 hunter. He asked Kabis to show him the skill window, and he noticed that he had already earned 20 points, and his strength had increased too. He asked the commander how to understand before starting a task, who is stronger than monsters or hunters, to which he replied that he determines the amount of mana by eye, because at the official employment, hunters are checked for the amount of mana. We commanders, before the beginning of the battle, always compare the amount of mana of hunters and monsters, and if we have more mana in total, then we should not worry. But if the mana is more in monsters, then we can only rely on the experience of hunters. "What's that in your hand?" Lee Khan asked. "It's a mana meter," the commander said. "But it's useless. It ran out of mana." And then Lee Khan asked him to let me see it. It was another gamble, but he poured some mana into the detector and it started working. The commander was very surprised by this, but he also noticed 3 more monsters not far from them. "Subscribe to the channel, thank you." Then Lee Khan called Kabis and asked her a question. "What happens if you give mana to a part of your body, like your eyes?" To which Kabis answered that if a part of the body is strong enough, it can, but if it's not, it can end badly. "It's really dangerous, but I'll try," said Lee Khan, and tried to mana his eyes. Everything went black, and he was in a lot of pain. "I warned you, but there's nothing you can do. You did it." But suddenly his sight returned to him, and he began to see a strange aura on all living things. For this, Kabis gave him a new skill, the study of mana. After a while, they finished their work and received their paychecks, 500,000 won. But they did a lot more work today and were not satisfied with their paychecks. It was Lee Khan's fault, but he gained new skills and raised his level. But he realized it wasn't enough. Lee Khan went to check on his father again. The doctor told him they couldn't cure him, but he could check on his father. He was awake now. He looked so tired, but his father asked him why you came. "I wanted to tell him I got a job with a good company." The father was happy, because now if he's gone, his son will be able to take care of himself. This made Lee Khan very happy, and he suddenly transferred mana to his father, which went into every cell of his body, so that he could regenerate himself. He gained a new skill. The father noticed his son's strange behavior, but he started to fall asleep, so he told him to leave and fell into a deep sleep. "Be patient, father. I'll be able to cure you soon." Lee Khan called out to Kabis and asked if this skill was enough to save his father. "No," she said, "but if you keep practicing and get new ones, you will definitely be able to cure your father." He went out of the room and was suddenly met by the bandits. "Hey, Lee Khan, did you forget about us?" The nurse asked who they were and if they should call the police, but Lee Khan said they were friends and they went outside. When they went outside, they started beating him for not paying back his debts. "But I transferred the whole amount to you," Lee Khan said. "That was just the principal. I raised the interest this month, so you owe us money." Lee Khan got angry, but they started threatening to hurt his father. "You have 7 days, Lee Khan." This made him very sad. He tried his best, but he still didn't have enough money, but he wasn't one to give up. Lee Khan decided to join. He only had a week to enroll in the Hunters Association, so he would have to work very hard to earn money. The Hunters Association is a kind of national organization for the awakened. In this organization, which was founded 28 years ago, they are given a license and additional privileges. They are allowed to legally slay monsters, and they also have the right to sell rare items that fall from monsters, because they can only be sold to the Hunters organization. Lee Khan went to the night market of hunters. He bought the necessary equipment. He is going to illegally kill monsters. It's illegal, but he has no choice. It's not the right situation to choose. He bought all the necessary items, except for weapons, and he can't get them from the organization. But as he passed by, he noticed an old man. He asked him to try the bow, and it was surprisingly good. But the old man asked 150,000 won for it, which was all his food expenses for a month. But suddenly, the old man lowered the price, and Lee Khan bought the bow. But he needed something for close combat, so he approached another old man. He was interested in a knife. It was in surprisingly good condition, and it looked like the kind they get at work. But he asked for another one that would not fall out of his hand during the fight, and the old man had one. He gave 70,000 won for the 2 knives. The cost was huge, but Lee Khan was willing to risk everything he had. The old man was happy that he had made a good profit for the day, but suddenly the police came and took him to the police station for illegal sale of weapons. Lee Khan came home and started to think how he could secretly get to the place where the monsters live. He needed a car and rented it on the internet. for which he gave the price of 2 months' rent for a place to live. All his business was done. Lee Khan decided to take a rest, but his boss from the factory called him. "Why aren't you at work?" Lee Khan went there and put an envelope on the boss's desk. He thought it was a letter of apology and tore it up. Lee Khan said it was a letter of resignation. "What did you say?" the boss asked in surprise. "Are you deaf or what?" asked Lee Khan. But the boss could not stand such insolence and attacked him. He struck a blow. But Lee Khan didn't get any damage from the blow. "You started it first," he said, and threw him on the table. "What's all the commotion?" A worker came into the room. He was shocked by the painting. Lee Khan shoved the letter of dismissal into his mouth. A letter of dismissal. He's more dangerous than he looks, the worker thought. Lee Khan breathed out a sigh of relief and said, "I knew this was the end of it, but he's been bugging me for years and he got what he deserved, so now I have only one job." Suddenly he found the executioner's hooks on the ground. Someone had left them here, so I'll take them. In the morning, Lee Khan went to the meeting place where the monster hunting machine was to be delivered. Everything was ready for the hunt, and Lee Khan went on his way. He was stopped by a soldier and asked to present his documents. Lee Khan started to get out of the way and created a big traffic jam, so the soldier decided to let him pass without any questions. His plan worked. The border guard was worried that he had let him through, but even if he had cheated them, going there alone would not end well for him. Lee Khan called up the ability window and decided to allocate 10 points to strength and 10 points to magic. "Now I'm ready. It's time to start," said Lee Khan, and went to look for monsters. He noticed strange footprints, and he used magic to make sure they were the footprints of a monster. He started to follow the monster, but suddenly it attacked him from behind. It was a low-class Volask monster. He couldn't use a bow at that distance, so he decided to use a hook. He threw it at the monster and used magic to bind the monster. This was a surprisingly useful skill. Lee Khan finished the monster and got experience for it, for the fact that he got a level increase for fighting it alone. Lee Khan was very happy, but he didn't have to be happy for long. 4 monsters appeared behind him. "I'm finished," he thought, and just started to run away. It wasn't hard to deal with one monster, but there were a whole bunch of them, Lee Khan thought. He ran and noticed a tall rock, so he pushed off it and climbed up the tree, hoping that the monsters wouldn't be able to get to it. But the monsters were smarter than they looked. They started gnawing on the tree. But Lee Khan quickly realized that while they are at a distance, you need to get a hunting bow and attack the monsters. Charging an arrow with magic, he shot an arrow at the monster, and it was so strong that it pierced through the monster. Lee Khan rejoiced, anticipating a quick victory, but the tree had already started to fall, and he tried to jump to the next tree. While jumping, his knife fell out, but he managed to escape. He started shooting at the monsters again. He defeated another one, but the next one was not successful. The monster pushed the tree and Lee Khan missed with his arrow. He got angry and quickly defeated this monster, but the last one disappeared somewhere. Then it suddenly appeared behind the guy's back, but he was ready for it. "I thought I was finished. I could barely handle one, and now I was attacked by 4 of them at once. It was extremely dangerous." But during this hunt, he raised his level and skill at the same time, which surprised him. "How am I going to get all these creatures out before the new ones come?" But he did it, and started looking for rocks inside the monsters. And to his surprise, he found one. It was a stone of the simplest rank, but even it would be enough to pay off all the costs of the equipment. He also increased his executioner's skill. But he realized that it was not enough, and continued hunting monsters. He coped with one more, but as always from behind came out a new. He immediately attacked Lee Khan, but he dodged, and with the help of close combat, he was able to defeat the monster. "I think I've figured out how to hunt them," thought Lee Khan. After a whole day of hunting, he had collected a whole chest of rare stones and raised his level to rank 8. He had increased all his skills and even gained some new ones. They were passive skills, but Lee Khan was not surprised because he was able to catch about 30 monsters in a day. And then he thought, "I got 20 new points. Where should I spend them?" In the end, he decided to invest in all skills 5 points, all except luck. "That's enough for today," said Lee Khan, and went home. When he got to the border, he was stopped for inspection by soldiers. They noticed how many monsters he caught and decided to let him pass. "It's just like I thought. They only check the documents at the entrance. But when I want to come here again, I'll have to be an official hunter, thought Lee Khan. He got rid of the tracks in the forest, because if anyone found out about his illegal activities. But he made it home safely. He slept for 20 hours, which was not surprising because he had spent a lot of mana. Lee Khan sat there thinking about how he could sell all these rare stones. They are worth several million each, but what's the use if I can't sell them? If I try to sell them officially, I'll go to jail, but I can't figure out how to sell them. Then Lee Khan found only one way: the secret market. At night, Lee Khan met up with an old friend of his father's. They went to a bar to talk. They talked for a long time, but at one point the old man asked, "You called me to tell me about your power of awakening, didn't you?" Lee Khan was shocked by what he heard. "How did you know?" "I've been on the battlefield for years and I can spot these things," the old man said. "Come on, tell me about it. What was it like to be awakened?" the old man asked. "I'm sorry, but I didn't call you here for that." He took a stone out of his pocket, and the old man got very angry and demanded an explanation from the young man. Lee Khan told him everything. The old man was shocked, but he realized that Lee Khan was doing it for his father, so he agreed to tell him about the secret market. The old man wrote the coordinates of the place on a piece of paper and left wishing him good luck. Lee Khan came to the place. It was a dark basement with an iron door. At first they didn't want to let him in, but he came on behalf of the old man, so they let him in. He was greeted by an old woman who asked him what he wanted. The old woman was surprised to hear Taesu's name again, so she started to ask the main character about him, but he replied that he didn't have time for idle chit-chat. This made the guard angry, and he decided to teach him a lesson. But when the old woman stopped the guard and said that you can't handle him anyway, a very interesting person came to us. "So why did you come to us, Awakened One?" Awakened One put a suitcase with magic stones on the table, which surprised the old woman. Even though they are low-grade stones, they are not easy to obtain. "You must be really strong," she said. The protagonist said he wanted to sell these stones, so the old lady asked him for his hunting license. He refused, and the old woman understood, but decided to help him anyway. She took out a device that could determine the density of the crystals. The density was quite small, and the old lady immediately realized who the guy was hunting. It's not surprising that there are so many defective stones, because the Valak stones often fall out of the Valaks, so hunters with a license don't hunt them. But the old lady understood her advantageous position and said she would give a maximum of 8 million won for the stones. The guy was angry. He didn't like it at all. But she quickly explained to him that he was working unofficially, and no one would buy the stones from him, so he had no choice. She put the folded bills on the table. Although she lowered the price a lot, "I don't remember the last time I held such a large sum in my hands," thought the protagonist. He was satisfied with the deal and left the basement. After that, he went to the ATM and sent all the money he owed to the bandits. One of the bandits puzzled over a text message from Hanyeol. A money transfer of 5 million won had come from him. His superior replied that there was clearly something fishy and too suspicious about the situation. He asked the hesitant subordinate, how could this guy have gotten such a large amount of money in such a short period of time? Even if he worked at a high hourly wage, it was unrealistic to earn that much in 3 days. The subordinate suggested the option that the debtor could have taken a loan from the bank, but the boss replied that if he was authorized for a loan, he wouldn't borrow from them. The boss sent his assistant Park Chul-min to find out where Hanyeol got the money from. He asked why and why not just leave it alone, but the boss said he didn't understand, because if the guy had more money, they could get more from him by threatening him. Meanwhile, the novice hunter came to the hospital again to visit his father. The nurse to the last tried to stop him and not let him into the room, but the young man was stubborn and went in anyway. According to the time, his father should have been conscious, because he came not so long ago, and already counted in what hours he was awake. But his dad was still asleep. The nurse replied that until 2 days ago his condition had been normal. But after he had fallen asleep yesterday, the usual 14 hours had long since passed, and at the moment he had not regained consciousness for 20 hours. The doctor in charge of treatment informed the unfortunate son through his assistant to prepare himself morally for the worst and the loss of his loved one. The girl was worried and replied to the young man that everything was not yet lost, and there was no need to give up, but the visitor, in an emotionless voice, asked to leave her alone with her father. The girl left the room and waited at the entrance. The boy looked at the dried, dead potted plant that stood in the corner of the room, unattended, and said to himself that after promising himself and Sister Kim to cure his father on his own, he had done nothing in all this time. He decided to try now and called Cabis to him. He came to ask why he had called her, to which Hanyeol clarified about the healing skill. He recalled the fact that she said he could heal his father with the healing ability. Ego replied that he could, in theory, effect a cure, but not with his current powers, and there was no telling what might come of the attempt. Hanyeol replied that nevertheless, he wasn't going to give up. The girl asked about what he was going to do, and that he had better stop. The young man took his father's hand and channeled his mana into his body. Everything around him lit up with a soft blue glow. The boy tensed up a lot, but continued to transfer all his strength to the sick man. He decided to put the full size of his mana solely into the healing skill. Cabis shouted to her master that she was spending too much mana. He didn't respond even when she called him simply by his name. He clutched his mouth, and suppressing a cough and the foam coming up within him, continued. His body was completely exhausted, but he answered the girl that he was fine. A panel and information appeared in front of him, announcing a skill change, and an increase in healing from rank F to rank C. At this moment, the guy lost consciousness and fell to the floor on his back, white foam pouring out of his mouth. At this moment, a nurse entered the room to see if Hanyeol had calmed down, and after discovering his condition, dropping the clipboard, called the doctors in a panic. The pot in the room was cured and began to bloom, but the father's condition was still unknown. The boy woke up in another hospital room in a change of pajamas, lying under a blanket. He immediately jumped up and started thrashing around in a panic looking for his dad until he realized where he was. Cabis answered him that he woke up fairly quickly. He had been unconscious for 2 days. From the massive waste of mana and energy, he couldn't wake up for 2 whole hours. Nurse Kim, after his seizure, immediately moved him to the general ward where he completely passed out. Cabis started yelling at her master for always getting into various dangers and mishaps. This time, everything more or less turned out safely, so she decided to turn a blind eye to the hunter's irresponsibility. The guy asked how everything ended well. At that time, a nurse walked into the room. Cabis pointed her finger at her and said she could explain everything to him in detail. Hanyeol said hello to Nurse Kim, and she dropped the medicine tray out of surprise. Once again, the shocked girl started calling for Dr. Kang, shouting to him that Lee Hanyeol had regained consciousness. The girl was told to calm down as people around her were worried. Park Chul-min climbed up to the high floor where Hanyeol lived with great difficulty and started knocking and ringing his doorbell. But no one opened. He found out that the debtor even quit his job at the factory, so what does he do? The guy assumed that Hanyeol couldn't not be at home, but he was wrong. After several bells and knocks, no one opened the door. On the floor outside the apartment was a can of banana milk with a tube, and with anger, Cheol-min threw the bottle, and it hit Ub, who was coming home. The guy didn't notice what he did, and was thinking about how angry his young would be if he came back empty-handed. The girl approached him with a droopy look, and the young man was startled, and then noticed that he had soiled her, which meant he had hit her with that bottle. He thought about what a lousy day it was, and began to apologize to the girl, promising to clean up the mess on the playground. Near the broken bottle was a note wet from the drink that read, "You have a practice exam today. I'm sure you'll do well. Hanyeol Oppa." It was a gift from Hanyeol, but from the looks of it, the girl hadn't noticed it in the morning, and now it had been spoiled in the evening. Yubi didn't even notice that she was doused with milk and that a tall man was standing in front of her. She had failed the exam, and that's why her mood was ruined. And now that she noticed, the milk that Hanyeol Oppa left for her was thrown at her. Cheol-min kept apologizing, asking him to forgive her, but the girl took off her backpack and pounced on him with her arms screaming to let all her emotions out. Meanwhile, Hanyeol was at a doctor's appointment. The doctor was highly excited and was telling the temporary patient that a real miracle had happened to his father. Not long after Hanyeol lost consciousness, Lee Chun-sam suddenly woke up, and in just a day, the number of hours he spent sleeping had returned to normal. If this wasn't a miracle, then what was it? Hanyeol looked tiredly at the cheerful Cabis and mentally asked her if that was what she meant by, "It came out fine." He looked at the doctor, who continued to be very nervous. The look on his face was agitated, and streams of sweat were running down his face from the stress. But although, if you think about it, Such a reaction from an ordinary person is quite predictable, since in all this time, the symptoms of his father's illness had never improved, and the fact that Hanyeol used magic, no one knows about it. The guy, instead of the warm and joyful reaction about his father's correction that he expected, and wasn't surprised, asked sharply when he could be discharged. Hanyeol was worried that his dad might see him in the hospital, and didn't want him to worry about his health while he was sick himself. The doctor told him that even though it was still unknown why he had suddenly lost consciousness, but his health and examination results were normal, he would be monitored for a couple more days, and once he was sure he was fine, he would be released. He didn't like being in the hospital, even though he had wanted to have a vacation for a long time. Besides, he did not want to pay the expensive hospital fees. He was about to run away, but at that moment Kim, the nurse, came in and asked him if she had just heard that he was planning to run away. But the guy replied that she had heard it. He asked the nurse how his father was feeling right now. She replied that he had recently eaten, and here he literally fell asleep a couple minutes ago. The girl then asked why he was asking, and if he was afraid to meet his parent in the hospital. He replied that he didn't want to bother him. Then the nurse suggested that he visit his father while he slept. After reporting to Dr. Khan, she escorted him to his father's room. He went in and saw the plant in the corner still blooming and fragrant, and his father sleeping a peaceful sleep. Hanyeol thought about whether he could use the healing ability once more. He took his father's hand and began to transfer mana to him, concentrating so that he could heal him one drop at a time and be more careful than last time. But suddenly, his hand became magnetized to his father's hand, and he couldn't take it away. And afterwards, he began to feel all of his mana begin to flow completely out of him and into his father's body. Cabis started yelling at him to let go of his father's hand, but he couldn't. The girl tried to do something herself then, and opened the information panel to figure out the user's skill settings. The panel showed that there was a transfer of rights to use the user's skills, and then the phrase, "Error, rejected." The red phrase then filled the entire screen, and access to the customizations was cut off. Cabis began to panic, and gathering magic in her fist, she made an emergency lockdown by tapping on the screen. At that moment, the guy let go. The plant in the corner wilted again, showing that the effects of the mana healing had been completely neutralized. Hanyeol asked the ego what it was. Cabis replied that he himself didn't know what had happened. However, he was sure that it was something reacting to his healing skill, as if something was resisting his skill. Afterwards, some suspicion arose in her, and she asked her master to use mana to examine it. Hanyeol channeled energy into his eyes, and with supervision, he saw the monster on his father's body. Only then did he realize why his father hadn't woken up for such a long time, and why they couldn't figure out the cause of his illness. Because all this time, it wasn't an illness at all. On his stomach lay a black entity, with a large black and yellow eye in the middle, which sucked on his body with its tentacles. Cheol-min bought a whole bag filled with banana milk cans for Yubi. He told the schoolgirl that she should have said Hanyeol's friend right away. The girl took one bottle and pierced it with a tube, and asked the guy what he wanted to ask her. In his mind, Cheol-min pondered that she should somehow believe him that he was Hanyeol's friend, so that he could find out where the debtor was. He replied to Yubi that Hanyeol hasn't been answering his calls lately, so he would like to ask her when she last saw him. The high school student replied that she saw him about 5 days ago. She ran into him when she was coming home from school. Hanyeol then told her that he had been in the mountains all day, which was probably why he looked so tired, and his bag was even heavier in appearance. The bag was similar to the one they use in the army. If she's talking 5 days ago, then it turns out it happened the day after we talked to him, 100%, thought Cheol-min. He then asked the girl if she knew anything else. Yubi remembered that she had met him outside the library the day before yesterday, but as she realized, Hanyeol was in a hurry somewhere. He didn't notice her, and in a flash, he got into a cab and left somewhere. Hanyeol Oppa told the cab driver to go to Seoul National University Hospital. She never saw him again. If that's the case, then that's where his father is being treated. The man thanked her for her help, and Yubi went to her apartment. The bandit decided to visit the hospital the next day. Hanyeol made his way to the nurse's office for discharge. Nurse Kim asked the patient to fill out 2 copies of the document, one of which was to be given to the administration on the way out. She was pleased that the young man went to discharge so soon. She almost fainted when she saw him lying on the floor of the hospital room. She was also glad that his father was on the mend. Hanyeol reflected that he was glad too, until he saw that dark substance clinging to his dad's body. Kabis had told him that she herself didn't know what the creature was. But she also said that she was 100% sure that what was happening to Lee Chun-sam was definitely because of that black clot. Seung was very angry. That thing had been devouring his father all this time, sucking all the life juices out of him, and he wouldn't forgive it. From the overflow of emotion, the boy began to glow with mana, and then Kabis began to calm him down. She told him that she understood what he was feeling right now, but that there was not much he could do right now. It would take time and experience. Together, they would surely find a way to solve the problem. She asked her master to be patient until she found a solution to the problem. Hanyeol thanked his friend, saying that thanks to her, he was able to gather his thoughts and decided to become much stronger to save his parent by all means. He recalled this dialogue that happened in the ward while he was filling out his discharge papers. The nurse called out to him, and he was instantly brought back to reality from the dream world. The hospital employee asked why he was in such a hurry, to which the guy replied that he had an urgent matter. He was taking an exam. The nurse didn't ask him what the exam was, but decided to leave him alone and stay out of his personal life. They said goodbye, and Hanyeol left the hospital. A couple minutes later, Chil Min walked into the office and approached the registration desk. He asked the nurse if a young man named Lee Hanyeol had come here. The young woman replied that he had just left the hospital. She wondered who this Hanyeol acquaintance was, and then remembered that it was one of the guys who had forcibly led him away last time. She sensed something wrong and called security to detain the suspicious visitor. The time was 2:20 p.m. Hanyeol still had 3 hours of free time. He was worried whether the exam would go well. After all, he had read a lot of information during the time he was in the hospital and was generally prepared. He put on his hiking backpack and determinedly headed off to become an official hunter. Meanwhile, a group of workers in gas masks and hazmat suits were doing repair work on a section of Seoul and discovered a huge, dangerous hole underground. The workers cordoned off the black hole's territory, blocking off the passageways to outsiders with yellow ribbons. They didn't understand how the hole had formed, or why they hadn't noticed it before, but in any case, the problem needed to be fixed as soon as possible. A man in a classic suit and sunglasses approached them. He asked for answers to a few of his questions. He said that he knew that the workers had discovered a huge black chasm, and then asked if they could show where it had formed. The team leader asked how the man knew all this, and why he had come, since outsiders were not allowed to enter. In response, the man in the tuxedo pulled out his ID card from his jacket pocket and apologized for forgetting to introduce himself. He identified himself as Kang Seong-hoon, an investigator for the Hunters Association. The workers told him everything they knew, and he asked if there were any more details. The commander replied that they didn't know anything else and had discovered the hole by accident. But by the way, the size of the hole was certainly impressive. There were whispers among the staff that since the investigator from the Hunters Association had come here, it was a big deal. They immediately realized that the investigator was not an ordinary police officer, because otherwise their commander would not be so worried in the presence of others. This type is a kind of awakened policeman, and they are much more powerful than the ordinary police, and deal with extremely important cases related to gate anomalies. It was best not to mess with this man, or else you could get a lot of trouble. They decided to find out in general what was even going on, since the policeman had sent a report to the associations about the hole, and what should be done next. This information was displayed on the workers' tablets, where an announcement glowed that the request had been approved. Kang Seong-hoon told the commander that his organization would occupy the place from now on, and he asked all the workers to evacuate. But the commander didn't want to leave, as it would interrupt their construction, but it was pointless to argue with the agent. The commander desperately replied that he would inform his subordinates to evacuate. At this point, the policeman asked if the man had heard any sounds, but the workers' supervisor did not understand what sounds he was talking about. The agent went to the edge of the abyss to listen. Despite the commander's warnings, he continued to stand there and peered into the abyss, lowering his body behind the warning signs with the yellow fence. Sung-hoon lowered his sunglasses and concentrated his mana on his eyes and used his supervision to see what lurked in the hole. Seeing something, He started shouting to the workers that everyone leave the place immediately. At that moment, the ground began to shake. After the earthquake, he said that they were too late. At this time on the surface, Hanyeol decided to walk to the exam site. He still had about an hour to walk, and he was already regretting not taking the bus. The place was much farther away than he had anticipated by looking at the map on his phone. As he crossed the pedestrian crossing, the ground began to shake violently. People began to panic from the vibrations coming from the ground. The asphalt began to fall under cars standing in traffic. One car fell under the ground, followed by others. The road literally split into pieces in a second. A little girl sitting among the rocks was crying, and one driver was crushed to the point where only one arm was sticking out of the ground. Hanyeol clutched his head and tried to regain his senses and think rationally about what to do now. An unfamiliar guy called out to him, asking for help to get the man who had been crushed by metal parts that had fallen from cars, traffic signs, and electric poles. Farther away from them stood another guy who was filming one of the potholes in the road with his phone camera, peering inside. They were able to pull the man out from under the collapse, and the stranger thanked Hanyeol. Suddenly, the awakened man felt something strange. He channeled mana into his eyes and looked into the hole in the road, through the screen of the young man's camera. He started yelling for everyone to run away from there immediately. Something red was heading out of the ground in a fast motion, which looked very blurry due to its speed. But after a second, the creature came to the surface, grabbing in its jaws the unfortunate guy who wanted to become famous on the whole internet with the video he had filmed. All that was left of him was his cap, which kept on lying on the ground after it fell from his head when the monster ate him. It was a huge insect or crustacean, resembling a bear or a crayfish, with huge claws, fang-like jaws, and many legs. Members of the Hunter Association Police Department descended to the ground after signaling a request for help. They began to look around and saw workers' pipes lying on the ground everywhere. Their blood splattered on the walls and floor of the already rebuilt part of the future subway. A girl in a classic suit was walking surrounded by soldiers in hazmat suits and carrying automatic rifles. One of the men marveled at what had happened here. "Hey, rookie, you want to wake up in the morgue? If not, shut up and work." The girl answered him. She looked at the radar and saw that they were quite close to the one who had sent the request for help. She ordered the group to look all over the area for anything strange and immediately report back to her when they found it. She reached the edge and saw a huge hole, and afterward, a soldier came up to her and reported that he had found a survivor. The policeman was sitting on the sidelines, holding his wounded stomach. He called the girl named Lee Hanyeol and asked why it had taken them so long to come, since it had been a long time since he had sent the request. The girl turned to Sung-hoon as her sunbae, and without answering his question about the delay in arrival, she asked him what had happened. She wanted to call the medics as soon as possible, but afterward, they all decided that it was better to report everything to the Hunters Association as soon as possible. The man said that the hole in the ground was not simple. He tried his best to block the abyss, but his mana was not enough. Afterward, he passed out before he could speak. In the depths of the hole lurked a magical gateway, from which the creature emerged, breaking through the tunnel in the ground to the outside with the help of its claws. People stood in a stupor in fear of the huge monster, which began to shout with an ear-splitting sound. Everyone grabbed their ears to drown out the ringing. After the people came to their senses and started running in different directions, the monster began to release from its mouth poisonous poison in the form of smoke with a greenish color. When the people inhaled it, they instantly lost consciousness, or even died. Hanyeol ran away from the deadly poison, hiding behind a car, trying to hold his breath. He began to assess the situation, realizing that he was most likely the only one awakened in the area. He pulled his backpack off his shoulders and began to draw his weapon. The creature began to drag the girl away with its claws, no matter how hard she tried to crawl on the ground. She screamed for help, and suddenly, an arrow flew towards the monster, illuminated by the blue glow of the awakened mana. Hanyeol shot at the crustacean, attracting its attention, and shouting that its opponent was him. So let go of the commoners and go to him. The guy was going to use the arrows in the exam, but now he had no choice, and it was more important to save people's lives. Of course, afterwards he could get charged for illegal use of skills, but in this situation it didn't matter. His arrows were passing through the monster's dense shell and couldn't hit it. His main goal was to at least attract its attention, but he was not able to do that yet, But after one arrow, the monster screamed and headed towards the awakened man, and he barely escaped from the claw, which with a single touch killed instantly. None of his attacks had left a mark, and perhaps he had wasted his strength and weapons, and should have just gotten the hell out of there. But he didn't consider his labor a waste of time, and he could at least distract the monster until more professional hunters arrived. And until then, the monster wouldn't pass on and kill people. Hanyeol continued to dodge and shoot at the monster, but the arrows ricocheted off the dense shell. The monster's claw once again nearly grazed the guy's head as he ran away to a distance to get a better shot. His strength was already running low, and the rescue team was still not coming. Chulmin walked out of the nurse's office to avoid being caught by security and saw patients in the hallways crowded around TV sets. They were broadcasting an urgent report from downtown, where a huge crustacean monster was rampaging, with only one guy fighting against it. The bandit recognized Hanyeol and was amazed that his debtor was an awakened man. While the guy was staring at the TV screen, the guard caught up with him and demanded him to follow him. Hanyeol's arrows were starting to run out, but the official hunter still hadn't arrived. He wondered how much longer he could hold off the creature, and suddenly he saw the 3 hunters he had been working with as a porter, hiding behind the same car. Hanyeol already believed that he was saved, but the hunters were in no hurry to enter the battlefield. One of the trio asked the others if they should fight back against the monster, but their leader said that there were no hunters here besides them, so they would sit quietly on the sidelines for now. The subordinate wanted to argue, but the leader again said that without the right weapons, they couldn't do anything, so they would just watch. That guy who was fighting now wouldn't be able to hold out for long, and the other hunters wouldn't. It would be true suicide to get into battle now. Hanyeol ran away from the monster's attacks in a panic, not understanding why those hunters kept standing aside, but eventually made sure that he couldn't expect any help from them. They were not going to help him or fight the monster, 3 cowards who only cared about their own skins. The awakened one was frustrated with the official hunters, and realized that the humans only had hope for him alone. He fired another arrow, but it flew past the monster's claw and hit the store sign, which fell on the monster, causing it to scream in pain. Noticing this, Hanyeol mentally apologized to the store owners as he had no other choice, and started shooting at all the signs and banners of the buildings surrounding them. Metal shields, banners, letters, and plates began to fall on the monster, causing it to fall to the ground under its weight and scream in pain. Hanyeol endowed a butcher's hook with mana and threw it at the monster with a rope. The rope wrapped around the large store canopy. The guy yanked the rope and gave the creature a crushing blow. Blood spurted from the crustacean's mouth. There were only a couple of last deadly blows to be made on certain points before the monster weakened. But it began to fill its lungs to exhale its poisonous breath into its mouth. At this moment, a crying girl who had lost her mom was walking down the road, and despite the huge monster, she wasn't going to leave until she found her. The guy was faced with a choice: take the girl away, or keep fighting, risking her life, since the shock and poison could hit her at any second. He didn't want to be like those indifferent official hunters, so he chose to save the girl, even though blocking the monster gave him great difficulty. An employee in a suit burst into the superior's office and shouted that they had an emergency. The blonde sat on the couch and watched Hanyeol on the TV while sipping tea. She watched his actions while fighting the monster. The girl replied to the subordinate that she was aware of what was going on, but she was interested in something. The man asked if they could move out to the scene. Hanyeol ran towards the girl and picked her up in his arms to run away from the spread of the poison. The girl called the hunter a strange uncle, which he couldn't understand. Is it possible to give such nicknames when you are on the verge of death? He jumped behind the car, and the monster's claw headed in their direction, red piercing the boy's back. At that moment, something super speedy with a glint of yellow lightning severed the claw, uttering the command, "Dissect." In front of him stood a girl with blonde hair and a sword that was divided into 2 blades, with an electric current spreading between them. She told Hanyeol that he wasn't bad, since he was able to last this long. The guy was shocked. The famous master-level hunter nicknamed Thunderlight He-Yon was standing in front of him. He confusedly replied to her that he was fine, thanks to her. The great huntress turned her attention to the screaming monster, and after telling it that it was unseemly to interfere in another's conversation, she activated her sword to its maximum, and while the monster was concentrating a clot of poison, she directed an electric shock at it, which took out half of the monster's body in a second. The second claw, along with the head, were gone, simply burned away. All that was left was the lower part of the body, which consisted of many legs. The cut-down part was charred in the shape of a funnel from the explosion that had occurred. The girl and the boy were shocked by the power of a master-level hunter. After the incident, ambulance and police arrived at the scene. Emergency services began to pick up people from under the rubble and hooked up oxygen masks to them. The girl's mom was able to find them together with Hanyeol and bowed to the young man, thanking him for saving his daughter. The guy replied that he hadn't done anything, and there was no need to thank him. But the woman kept saying thank you for the work he had done, no matter how much the boy excused himself for not having done any work. The girl said goodbye to him, calling him strange uncle for the second time, which didn't please the awakened man much. Hyun came up to him and kindly handed him the bow he had dropped in the battle. He took the weapon, thanking the girl. She asked his name, and he introduced himself, calling himself Lee Hanyeol. Addressing him by his name, the huntress thanked the young man, as she was able to finish off the monster thanks to him. But the boy thanked back, for she had saved his life. Then he remembered that he was in a hurry to get to a place, and after looking at the time on his phone, he calmed down. He still had time to make it to the beginning. He wanted to say goodbye to Hyun, but she said that all the roads were blocked, and there were huge traffic jams everywhere. Hanyeol got nervous again, afraid that he would miss the exam, so the girl decided to help him and asked him where he was going. The guy replied that he needed to go to the Hunter Association, and then she approached an employee from the association named Hanyeol, who found the policeman underground and responded to a call for help. The huntress asked the manager for help, and she called for a helicopter, but only agreed to it for the reason that she also needed to go to the association, so she didn't mind giving Hanyeol a ride to the building, especially since he was a great help to them. The shocked guy got into the helicopter and reached the right place in no time. Together with Hanyeol, they went inside the building. The female employee put her card to the entrance and asked Hanyeol why he kept standing still and didn't put his card. The young man replied that in truth, he had come here to take the hunter's exam. The girl was shocked by such a statement after fighting that monster. Hit or two, and suddenly, one of the trolls swung a tree at him. Due to his merits recorded by the cameras today, they would just measure his mana and see his skill, so he was exempted from the written exam because he had already practiced all the theory, and he had been a porter for years, so he had an exception. The awakened man thanked the girl, and the girl tiredly asked if there was anything else he wanted to report to her. He decided to report a team of hunters registered as SW 5587. He had encountered them during the battle, but they had abandoned their duty and left, avoiding the battle. Besides, he had worked with them as a porter, and they had used them as bait and cannon fodder more than once, so he had asked them to check them out and take note. The girl made a note in her clipboard, and after thanking the young man left. He went up to office number 12. A girl with brown hair stood in front of him. They were alone in the office. She greeted him and told him that all the workers had already left, and the sooner they did all the procedures, the sooner she could go home. The boy apologized for the delay, and they proceeded to measure his mana. He was handed a set of replacement clothes for the X-ray, and while being escorted to the right place, was told that he did fall into the exclusion category, which the organization rarely did. In fact, he had to write a written exam first, like everyone else, after which he would be expected to undergo 4 weeks of training with the other students. But now, after expressing his merit in today's battle, he only needed to turn in a mana result and perform a skill check. He was surprised at his luck, but it was for the best, because if he had trained for 4 more weeks, he would have had to continue hunting illegally. But now he could get his license in just a couple of days. Hanyeol changed his clothes and made his way to the special room where the special measuring lamps were lit up. He panicked briefly as everything around him started to shake, but the girl behind the wall told him to calm down. He left the room, and his results were already being printed on the printer. The girl was puzzled. Normally all awakened ones had a mana size of rank C or D, but Hanyeol had a rank F, which was the lowest. Hanyeol thought that this must be what Cabis was talking about when she said that the mana was smaller than she thought. The staff member told the awakened man not to despair, as his mana level could increase, so he only had to make a skill check. She handed him a form on which he had to indicate the skills he possessed, and then proceed to demonstrate them. The entire process was filmed and then sent to the association's archives for safekeeping. Hanyeol's first skillet was Defense of Cabus, but was it worth writing? No one knew about his ego, and he didn't even know if such creatures appeared in other awakened ones. He decided that he wouldn't talk about Cabus, so he wrote 3 skills, namely Crushing Blow, Coercion, and Healing. The skills were all from different categories, and the staff member was once again amazed, as he could not be categorized as a dealer, healer, or assistant. Well, apparently we'd have to determine his purpose by demonstration. Obviously, this guy had had a rough road. Lee Hanyeol stood on the platform waiting for his group for the first hunt. A man approached him, calling him by name, and told him that he was his commander, Ham Ji-pyong. Their team was called Onyx. 2 days before, Hanyeol had returned to his apartment, having passed all the checks that had failed to give him a full-fledged skill assignment, and assigned him a rank of F. He watched the news on the internet, and surprisingly, there wasn't a word about him in any article. He asked his ego to show him a screen listing all the characteristics. His skills had improved and increased greatly. He was able to earn new points, which he decided to fully channel into magic since his mana level was very low. But nevertheless, he was able to get officially qualified. Cabus suggested that he go on his first official hunt with some group, because that way he would be better able to set himself up to raise his skill. But in the area he usually worked in, only the team of irresponsible hunters he had recently reported to was taking on cases. So he decided to look on the Hunters Association website to find a team. As it turned out, most of them took a minimum of Class E or D to recruit hunters. Hanyeol was desperate. He couldn't get into a team with a Class F, so he decided to place an ad himself, in which he indicated all his skills and that he was looking for people to join the team. Some time passed, and Hanyeol and Cabus even got tired of waiting. There was no response. But suddenly the phone rang, and the guy answered. He had arranged for a troll hunt in Incheon, where he was promised more than the standard earnings. But since there was no choice, he agreed. And so he stood on the platform and watched the porters hauling the load, including his, and it made him very unaccustomed and uncomfortable. They were loading a large amount of ammunition, and Hanyeol told the commander that he knew they were going to hunt trolls, but he didn't realize it would be this big. Ham Ji-pyong asked if Hanyeol had ever seen trolls, to which he replied that he had only once 2 years ago when he was a porter, at which point the commander interrupted him, excitedly saying that they were just looking for someone as experienced as him. They were abruptly missing an aide, and because of that, they could be in big trouble. This kind of talk made Hanyeol have more and more doubts about the practicality of this sortie, but there was no turning back. The loudspeaker announced the end of the preparations. Then Hanyeol heard manager Taesu stop SW 5587's team leader because the association had suspended his license. He told the hunter that those were the orders and there was no going against him, and then the guy became indignant about who could complain about him. Hanyeol watched this on the sidelines and marveled at how fast the Hunters Association worked. Manager Taesu noticed Hanyeol and thought to himself that it was amazing that he had become an official hunter so quickly, but he didn't approach him. Then he saw who his longtime friend was with, and realized what kind of types they were. They arrived by boat at Incheon Island, and began unloading supplies onto the shore. The guy kept wondering how much gear they had brought with them, but Ji-pyong said it's only better when you're fully prepared and armed. He then asked the newcomer if he knew that a gateway to another dimension had opened on Panin Island. Hanyeol replied that he knew. It was a place where people were isolated, and no one was able to escape the trolls' attack. The commander said, approved that the subordinate was aware of the situation, and then began to give orders as the preparations were finished. Putting on their backpacks and picking up their weapons, the squad headed deeper into the forest. Ji-pyong walked ahead with his radar. Hanyeol looked at one of his new comrades, and the latter threatened him to be on this mission as seriously as possible, apparently thinking that he couldn't do anything since his rank was F. The commander stopped and said he caught a signal. A huge log of a tree that had just been ripped out of the ground flew towards them, and everyone scattered. A huge troll with clawed paws and a huge fanged mouth instead of a face, with no eyes, came towards them. The commander began to yell, what everyone was staring at, and then ordered the porters to fire their automatic rifles. The bullets only slightly grazed the troll's skin, which healed instantly. The monster began to scream, and then ripped a tree trunk out of the ground again, and threw it in their direction. The commander ordered them to prepare for the next attack. The shield guy summoned his power by saying the word provocation, and with that, he was able to attract the attention of the monster, who threw a log towards his shield, followed by another one. He was able to repel the attack with the power of the hovering shield. After that, the second member of the squad began firing fiery bullets with an assault rifle, endowing it with his mana, which emitted a red light. The troll began to catch fire in some places, and black smoke began to billow around it. The huntress from the team jumped up with her spear in her hand to finish the creature, shouting to the others to trust her, and activating her mana, which emitted the element of electro, called on the chain lightning ability. But her strike only hit the monster in the shoulder, and it hit the girl with a new log, causing her to fall. The man with the shield shouted her name to Hanyeol, but she told him that she was fine. It was just her carelessness. But at that moment, she noticed the troll's paws near her, and realized she couldn't dodge. He was about to claw at the girl, when suddenly his paws were tied with ropes. Hanyeol threw the ropes with hooks towards the troll, and those trapped him. He started shouting to the others to kill the monster sooner, as it wouldn't be able to hold on for long. The girl was surprised at the newcomer's ability, and then took the situation into her own hands, and delivered a deadly blow with her spear, calling her skill Wind Swing. The monster began to be electrocuted and screamed in convulsions. The girl jumped back and breathed a sigh of relief, telling herself that she had almost died. A shield maiden approached her and asked if she was okay. The girl replied that she was fine, and if it wasn't for Hanyeol, she wouldn't know what to do. The man answered her that he didn't have any hopes for the boy, and was also extremely surprised. The young man snickered as he watched their dialogue, hinting as if they were discussing him in his own presence. The troll was defeated, and needed to get to the next thing sooner rather than later. The stretcher-bearers needed to bring all the equipment they needed. A boy named Cheol-jin was left without an assignment, so the commander asked him to stay behind to guard the troll's corpse, because he had the flame skill. But the hunter was nervous, but he couldn't refuse. When Ji-pyong saw his nervousness, he assigned Hanyeol to him, as he had experience with trolls. The two young men were not thrilled to be working as a team, for it was the former who had told Hanyeol to be more serious at the beginning of the mission, underestimating his strength. All the squad members headed back to the shore to get equipment to process the corpse. Cheol-jin complained that this kind of work was always thrown at him, and then asked the newcomer what needed to be done now. Hanyeol replied that he needed to check the monster's weaknesses, such as the brain and heart, because they might otherwise get a second wind and regenerate, causing the troll to have to be killed again. The guy with the machine gun noted that his partner really wasn't lying about his experience, and since Hanyeol had fried the monster's heart well with his lightning attack, now they needed to decapitate it. Cheol-jin had no sooner aimed the muzzle of the automatic rifle at the monster's neck than the monster began to rampage and scream. No sooner had they stripped it of its head than its brain had already woken up. The man was panicked and stood in a stupor, and suddenly, a lightning bolt emitting blue mana light stabbed straight into the monster's throat. Hanyeol told his partner not to let his guard down. After all, trolls have incredible vitality. He was the one who fired his bow, appearing more serious than an experienced hunter. Cheol-jin replied to him that he would be more careful, and at that moment a tree trunk struck him. 2 more trolls were heading in their direction from the forest. Cheol-jin was lying on the ground unconscious. Hanyeol called out to him, not understanding how this had happened, and even more not understanding why there were twice as many trolls this time, if they were hunted when they were alone. One of the ogres swung the tree again and wanted to hit Hanyeol, but Hanyeol was able to duck at the last moment and run away. The troll's saliva began to flow from his mouth, and he began to approach the lying Cheol-jin to eat him. As soon as the monster reached out its clawed paw, several of its fingers were severed by the arrow. Hanyeol drew the bowstring, and was already aiming the second arrow, threatening to make the monster not dare to approach his partner. He wondered how he could hold out until the others returned, and would they be able to resist, or would they be confused by the surprise? How could he get into such a mess again? A clawed paw headed in his direction, and he recoiled at the last moment. He scolded himself for letting his guard down. From the impact with the ground, his bow broke. It was a disaster. The trolls were already advancing towards him with logs in their hands. There was nothing left but a melee attack. He took out his knife and said that this was a battle not for life, but for death. A projectile flew next to Hanyeol's shoulder and exploded near the trolls. "You are now officially a hunter, but your actions are still as reckless as ever," said a familiar voice behind him. The boy turned around and saw Taesu Ajoshi. The man said that if he wanted to know how he got here, then unfortunately he would leave all the questions for later, and now it was more important to finish off the monsters. At this time, the rest of the squad began to return to them. Ji Pyong, with his shield in his hands, couldn't believe his eyes when he saw what was happening. Taesu told him that if he had time to be surprised, he should spend it helping with the trolls. He fired the minigun again, and the troll fell to the ground. Because of the smoke rising, the man couldn't see if he had hit or two, and suddenly, one of the trolls swung a tree at him. Ji Fel summoned his hovering shield ability and ordered Hanyeol to drag Cheol-jin to safety, as he was the only one of the gathered men with a healing skillet. Together with the porter, Hanyeol carried his comrade to safety, and then began to channel his healing power into him, asking the porter if he knew how to do CPR. The fellow replied that he could. Meanwhile, the rest of the hunters along with the manager continued to fight. They were able to knock one down, but they were taking damage themselves as well. And then, with his side vision, Hanyeol noticed the bullets from Cheol-jin's shotgun and used the mana in his eyes to inspect them. They were indeed loaded with his fire energy. Then, he had a plan in mind, and he handed over to his comrade's porter to give him first aid, as his condition was not critical and could be done without healing, or a little later. He borrowed a weapon from the bearer, summoned Kabis, and then asked her if he could fill the weapon with most of his mana. The girl replied that she could, but she didn't have time to finish. The hunters were able to knock out one of the trolls, but the other one was out of power, and Taesu had run out of cannon shells. Hanyeol ran toward them and shouted for them all to get out of here. He only had one chance. He threw a bundle of Cheol-jin's ammunition towards the troll and then shot them with his mana-charged assault rifle. There was a huge explosion. The stretcher-bearers began sawing the dead monsters into pieces with chainsaws. Hanyeol watched the process until his partner asked him where he was looking. Hanyeol asked him where he was looking, to which he replied with a nervous twitch, and said he wasn't looking anywhere, but continued to heal her wounds. She didn't relent, and kept asking. Then he told her that he was originally a porter too. So now it was strange to stand and watch others do this work. The girl replied that she too had been a porter before, though only for half a year before she awakened. She then said that Hanyeol was very talented, and his healing skills were quite good. She honestly admitted that she couldn't believe that he had only recently awakened, considering his skills and experience. The guy realized that this praise was insincere. After all, an F-rank hunter couldn't be treated so friendly and appreciated. He was inferior to everyone else, but due to his experience as a porter, he wasn't used to it. At this moment, the blood of one of the trolls splashed in a large stream and hit Hanyeol. The porter apologized as the saw had malfunctioned, but the girl became angry, and her hands began to spark with lightning. She wanted to hit and punish her subordinate with her power, but Hanyeol stopped her, because the porter didn't do it intentionally. It was an accident. The girl walked away from them with her nose held high. He didn't understand how they could treat porters like that, if they were porters themselves, or if all hunters became like that in time. Hanyeol noticed that Taesu Ajushi was talking to Commander Ji Fel, and they had been talking for quite a while. What was it about? Time passed, and all the carcasses were loaded in metal crates onto the ship, and then everyone returned to the port, and thus ended the entire sortie. Cheol-jin was all wounded and bandaged, and was walking with the help of his comrades. Hanyeol was also quite exhausted after using the healing power for quite a while. He asked Kabis to show the information panel, which showed that he had only gone up 2 levels. But that was because when working as a team, the points were distributed to everyone involved in the battle with the monster. He also has a new skill called Magic Blast, which apparently formed when he blew up Cheol-jin's ammo. Commander Ji Fel approached him and frowned, asking him how he was so smart, and it turns out he knew everything from the beginning? The guy didn't understand what he was talking about, and asked the man in charge about it. But the man changed the subject, and said that as the old man had said, the money would be sent to him tomorrow, but with the deduction of Cheol-jin's ammunition and weapons that he had blown up. Afterward, the man left. Hanyeol didn't understand his temper, but at that moment, Taesu Ajoski came up to him, and said that this was the true face of Ji Fel, and afterward told the young man that his problem was that he was too naive. This team of Onyx hunters are scam artists. They hire rookie hunters and use them on hunts. Then they don't pay them the promised amount. Usually, the lower-ranked hunters get about 4 million won per day. And the most important news is the dividend of 100 million won from the sale of monster material. As it turned out, the Onyx group didn't say a word to the guy about the dividends, promised an amount 1.5 times the normal amount, and didn't sign a written contract with him. Taesu said that the guy should have left as soon as he felt weird, and eventually, the manager talked to the commander, threatening to tell the higher-ups in the association about their shenanigans, since he has a lot of connections, and on pain of losing his business, Ji-Fel agreed to pay the money to Hanyeol. But now he would have to be more careful about which teams to go to the monsters with. The Ajushi then asked how Hanyeol had become an official hunter so quickly, to which the young man replied that he had done a little bit of honors, and the association had made an exception and accelerated the exam for him. The man realized that the people of the association probably suspected him of something and were secretly watching him, because they didn't give exceptions to anyone for nothing. Hanyeol's equipment was completely destroyed, and then Taesu took out a business card from his wallet and handed it to the boy. It was the business card of a store that sold good weapons and could customize them for the hunter. The young man thanked the Ajusi, and then he gave him a ride home in his car. Chulmin reported to his boss that Hanyeol was now an awakened man, and he couldn't get him anywhere and shake him down for money. The man irritably asked how they were going to get all the money out of him now when there was a knock on their door. A man came into the room and asked if this office was in the business of finding people. The guy in charge said yes, and then the client asked him to find the asshole who had scammed him. The next morning, Hanyeol received a remittance notice. Group Commander Onyx had transferred nearly 30 million won to him, and he could have been cheated out of such a large sum of money. If he had this amount on hand, he would have paid off all his debts. But right now, he planned to go to the armory and replenish his equipment stock. He arrived at the address given in the business card, and in no way expected that the place would turn out to be an elite multi-story building. He was embarrassed to go inside, but he did it nonetheless. A smiling girl greeted him at the front desk and asked him to show his license. After looking at the information on the card and recognizing that he was a hunter, she asked him to go through a special entrance for hunters. In the next hallway, he was greeted again by another girl in the same uniform. She said that she would be his escort today, and her name was Soo Young. If he was looking for something specific, he should let her know right away. She escorted him to the floor where she sold weapons. It was a long corridor flanked by pavilions of stores like in a shopping mall. The girl said she would be waiting for him in the corridor with a cart on which to put everything he bought. The young man was very confused and didn't know where to go. The first shop that caught his eye was the dwarf's workshop, where they made customized weapons. Behind the counter sat a girl who had fallen asleep with her head resting on the countertop. She woke up and sleepily asked what he needed. Hanyeol replied that he needed equipment. She put on her glasses and started writing down, asking what kind of gear he needed. He said he needed restraint chains. The girl had an ambiguous reaction, and then the guy realized he had somehow misspoken and started explaining that he needed equipment that could hold and keep an object from moving. He then realized that she didn't know what a coercion skill was, and therefore misunderstood him. He began to ask not to get the girl's phone, and not to call anyone that she had misunderstood him. A tall, muscular man with a gray beard came out of the workshop and asked what was going on here. The shop, at the dwarf's, turned out not to be in the dwarf's possession at all, and the guy had time to get scared, as the girl told her grandfather about what the guy had told her and how she understood it. But eventually, they made their way inside the store, and then Hanyeol explained everything, and the man apologized for his granddaughter. He asked the guy to demonstrate his skill, since he had never seen anyone use a weapon to immobilize a monster before. The guy took a rope with a hook and threw it at the mannequin, which immediately tightened into a knot. The man said the demonstration would help him in making the equipment he needed, and asked to come back in 4 hours. Then everything would be ready. The hunter walked out, and now headed out to choose his weapon from the available weapons. So Young escorted him to a store that sold firearms. The manager of the store brought Hanyeol a copy of the pistol used by porters, but he refused because he had recently worked as a porter and wanted a different weapon. Then the girl said that this collection was given to the porters, and the hunters did not really want to buy it. The guy asked to show some weapons with good firepower. In response to this, the girl decided to show him one of the new products that was very practical and effective. She brought an improved model of automatic rifle imported from Germany. It came with a grenade launcher. In addition to that, a few other options were attached, but it was better to feel everything in practice. She invited him into the room where the weapon could be tested. After shooting the machine gun a few times and taking off the headphones, Hanyeol, with his eyes burning, said that he was delighted. The girl voiced the amount of money, and then the guy snickered. The rifle cost 10,000 won, and it was a significant portion of his entire earnings. The girl understood that this price was a biting one, and explained that this rifle was equipped with a strong barrel with high conductivity of magic, and it performed even better when using magic bullets. It was a design exclusively for hunters, plus the product was imported, and the amount included taxes, of course. She offered him to look at more budget copies if the amount didn't suit him yet, but the guy decided that it was not necessary to save on life, and 10,000 won was not worth as much as his own life, and now he needed the most effective and practical weapon. He bought an assault rifle, and then the girl started offering him bullets and other various bonuses and parts. In the end, Hanyeol spent almost all of what he earned. The cart was filled with boxes, and he held a long receipt in his hands. The manager of this store definitely knew how to sell, as he himself wasn't planning on buying so much. But still, everything he bought would come in handy. He asked Soo-young if they had a delivery service, and the girl said that they did, but it was forbidden for hunters to keep their weapons at home, so they would be delivered to the local weapons storage center where he lived, and other things not related to the weapons themselves would be brought to his house. Now all he had to do was to return to the dwarf's workshop. The guy walked into the shop, and the girl greeted him again, and he said that he had come for an order. The grandfather came out of the workshop and said that he had come just in time, and everything was ready. Hanyeol went inside to see what his new customized weapon looked like, but on the table was an ordinary knife. Next to the knife was an obscure structure with a coiled cable lying next to it. The man replied that it had been a long time since he had crafted such unusual equipment, so he had gotten a little carried away. Hanyeol was disappointed and angry, but the master asked him to calm down and try out his skill with this weapon before judging him. The boy agreed. It was very different from what the hunter had envisioned. He inserted the knife into a metal box where the rope was drawn to the hilt, and then when he threw the rope, causing the coercive force, the blade turned into a hook. It was a mana-modified weapon like Hee-young had, when her sword became a double-bladed weapon, with a current passing between them. The opinion of the new weapon changed, and the guy was delighted. Such a weapon was convenient in that if an unforeseen circumstance happened, he could use the hook as a knife for close combat. He went to pay at the cash register, and the granddaughter of the master said that this weapon was worth 50 million won. Hanyeol didn't expect such an amount, so he asked if he could buy it in installments. The girl snidely said that he didn't have any money. Then the man left the workshop and apologized for his granddaughter, that she holds grudges for a long time, although she herself was to blame for the conflict that happened in the morning. He was willing to give the weapon for only 5 million won, on the condition that Hanyeol would only come to repair and purchase new weapons from him. He explained that it had been a long time since he had made such an unusual weapon, and he was a bit inspired to create, and he would be happy to have him as a regular customer. He walked out of the store and looked at his remaining balance. There was 7.5 million won left in the account, and then he thought about the fact that he needed to pay his debts before they went into interest again, or better yet, pay a month in advance. He wanted to transfer the money, but the transfer gave an error about a non-existent bank account, so he started calling the creditors on the phone. But they didn't pick up the phone no matter how many times he called, which seemed very strange and incomprehensible to him. The next day, Hanyeol went hunting in a rented truck. He listened to the news on the radio, which said that after the discovery of the underground gate last week in Seoul, new interdimensional gates had begun to be discovered. Today they had invited an expert into the studio to talk about the gateway to another dimension. The program asked the expert what his thoughts were, that the emergence of the interdimensional gates had something to do with the fact that very soon the 30 years promised by the alien race to test their abilities would pass. The expert replied that all these were groundless rumors, and it was impossible to say anything for sure. The host then asked what he thought about the association's statement that they were planning to seal the interdimensional gate by sending a large guild led by the Hermos Guild on this task, while isolating the gate's zones of origin. The expert replied that, of course, sending a large guild on that mission was a good way to do it, but he was afraid to assume that heavy losses would be avoided. Based on the known information, those monsters that emerge from the interdimensional gate are of the same species as the creatures in our world, but are much stronger than them. If the association didn't take this point into consideration, the hunters could suffer great damage. Hanyeol was driving, and thinking about the fact that he himself had encountered a crustacean from a similar abnormal gate, and he really didn't want to meet such a beastie again. On the road, he was stopped by a clerk to check at the exit of the city. This time, Hanyeol calmly showed his hunter's license, and the soldier was surprised that he was going hunting alone. He had heard of solo hunters, but he had never seen them. Hanyeol thought that if he hunted alone as opposed to working with a team, he could improve his skills faster and earn more money. Besides, he wouldn't trust other hunters anymore, and there were few groups that would be willing to take an F-ranked hunter into their ranks. Even though his choice was very dangerous, it was the best one for now, and he would only rely on himself. The soldier let him through, and he drove behind the huge barricade that kept the interdimensional gate creatures from entering the city. He had 4 shrapnel and 3 hand grenades in his truck. Then he filled the magazine box and was ready. He hunted in an abandoned part of the city that had been overrun by monsters. Even though he was still in a safe zone, his phone was no longer picking up a connection. Afterward, he noticed that there was a row of large vehicles near his parked truck, and a large group of hunters standing near them. Apparently, he was not the only one who had decided to hunt in the area today, but he decided that they wouldn't bother him, and he would keep his distance from them. Hanyeol climbed onto a floor of an abandoned high-rise building and looked through his binoculars, searching for his prey. There were several orcs in his field of vision. These monsters were nothing like the usual orcs from fairy tales, but they were just as huge and bloodthirsty. But that didn't make any difference. He aimed his rifle at the monster's scruff and fired, causing the monster to fall to the ground dead. The other monsters screamed and realized where the shot had come from. The hunter was dissatisfied with the orc's cleverness. Hanyeol took a grenade launcher and started firing at the remaining 3 monsters. The orcs began to scatter in different directions, and then he charged a large projectile and triggered the magic explosion ability. The bomb hit another monster, and there were only 2 left to kill. Behind his back, a 3rd monster began to climb up the floor of the building, and the hunter pointed the machine gun in its direction. But suddenly, the machine gun ran out of shells, and the monster started moving towards him. Then she summoned a coercion skill, and the knife transformed into a hook and bound the orc, cutting off its arms. The boy marveled at what the additional functions of the new weapon could do, and afterward, Cabus pronounced that he had gained a new skill called Strike Chain. Now he had time to reload his ammo, but at that moment, the last orc appeared from the other side, but there was no second hook and rope to tie up, and there was nothing to shoot with. Then Cabus urgently told her master to use the new skill of Shock Chain, and when he uttered it and empowered it with mana, the tied rope twisted, and under the pressure, crushed the orc to pieces. Hanyeol then aimed the new skill and weapon at the latter, and did the same. The new ability could crush the bodies of monsters with rope squeezing. He then gathered all the monsters into a pile, and began to pull crystals out of them. When he was working illegally, it was enough for him to sell, but now on official duty, he had to deliver the carcasses of the slain as well. Even though he was alone, the hunting, transportation, and slaughtering itself was on him, and it made him very tired. Now it was clear why hunters hired porters. Suddenly, an unfamiliar girl came near him at close range and asked him what he was doing. He remembered that she was from the company of hunters he had seen when he arrived. She didn't understand why he was dismembering the bodies himself, if he was a hunter by equipment. He said he was working alone, and was already expecting the surprise and ridicule he had gotten at the checkpoint and exit. But the girl said he was cool, and she admired him. She wanted to ask him a lot of questions, but her friend came up to her and led her away to her team. They said goodbye, and the girl shouted goodbye that one day they would meet again, and he would tell her everything. He thought this girl was very strange. When Hanyeol had killed the 3 monsters and put all the containers in the car, He noticed that one of the orcs had not been killed completely and was able to crawl away. He noticed drops of black blood on the road, and activating his magical observation, he saw the monster's footprints heading towards a hole in the road. He started walking there, unaware of anything, and when he looked into the hole, he threw a hand grenade into it. It exploded, and he aimed his automatic rifle, waiting for the creature to come out. But dozens of orcs started coming out of the cave. He found their nest, where more than 100 of them swarmed. There was nothing left for him to do but run. He was able to run to a car and began to drive away at full speed. When he was able to escape, he decided that the results of the hunt would be enough for today. And now, perhaps he needed another way to hunt. The next day, Hanyeol sat in the coffee shop and read on his phone, on the hunter's Wikipedia, all the articles he needed to learn. He realized that his sortie was too wounded, and he didn't know much yet. A girl he'd met on yesterday's hunt approached his table. She said her friend was running late, and could she sit down with him so she wouldn't be bored. The young man let her sit down, and she asked his name. He said his name, and then said he knew her name was Lee Jie. The girl was surprised, and asked if he was a stalker, but he replied that he heard her partner calling her by her name yesterday. After Jie asked the question, "Why is he working alone?" Hanyeol didn't want to answer the question, and said he would answer if she told him the reason why she wanted to know. The girl sank down and told of her traumatic experience. In times of war, there had been an explosion not far from her home. As a result of the final blast wave, her parents were killed. She was left alone, locked inside the rubble. Before Jie was found by rescuers, she sat in total darkness for 2 days. But the girl was truly left behind when she climbed to the surface. No one wanted to take the orphan into their family. She flitted from one relative to another, and in the end, she stayed with no one. That's when her fear of loneliness started, so she tries to work with people and spend time with her friend as often as possible. But when she saw Hanyeol working alone yesterday, she wondered how he got to the point of working only with himself. The young man apologized for forcing the girl to tell such personal things and to remember psychological traumas. But the girl thanked him for listening to her. She saw in the window that her friend had already arrived and began to say goodbye to her new acquaintance. The friend was her partner from yesterday, who they were apparently close with outside of work. Hanyeol stopped the girl and briefly replied that he worked alone because he didn't trust other hunters. But afterward, he added that he wouldn't mind working with her. She smiled and walked away, and he wondered if he could really trust his new friend. Hanyeol was waiting at the cafe for the prospective subordinates. He was interviewing for personal porters, who were a young guy named Choi Seong-beom and a girl named Lee Ari, who had agreed to work with him. Together with the new porters, Hanyeol went on a new hunt, to the same place, to mop up the discovered orc lair. As Sunbomb shot at the orcs with his automatic rifles, he thought to himself, what kind of hunter would think of attacking an orc lair alone? A normal hunting group should be operating in such a place. However, that F-ranked hunter is working alone? Sunbomb regretted the contract he had signed, and felt that he should have realized everything from the moment Hanyeol had mentioned in the cafe yesterday that he was hunting alone. The carrier had never imagined that such a hunt was such a reckless venture, but he had been promised a day's wages, and no one in their place would have refused such an offer. It was his own fault for signing the contract so hastily. And Ree was also firing at the orcs with a machine gun, and marveled at how easily they were killed. Perhaps it was because the hunter had asked them to use his bullets, and he had apparently given them his magic, which did more damage than regular bullets. The girl had run out of bullets and needed to change them, and while she was doing so, an orc crept up behind her. Before she could react, Hanyeol had already tied him up with his cable. He asked if she was all right, and told her not to overdo it. She was surprised that the hirer was indeed a rank F. She had been watching him the whole expedition. His movements and skill power were far above rank F. He looked like a seasoned professional. In her 3 years as a porter, this was the first time she had seen such a frame. He had already fought the new orc, throwing a hook rope at him, and throwing a punch, and then firing his assault rifle afterward. He knew that the situation that happened to him from the last hunt could happen again. So he went to the dwarf store once more to upgrade the chain. But the shopkeeper was, of course, a bit taken aback that Hanyeol had returned after 1 day. But the new skills required weapon improvements at the rate they were developing. He was now able to split a linked chain, thanks to a skillful master. True, it took him a decent amount of money to improve the cable, and on top of that, he hired 2 porters. But with their help, he could kill many more monsters and make more profit even with the deduction from their wages. He hired professional porters because their equipment was much better than the ordinary ones, and they had a reputation that showed they could be relied on. The 3 of them had managed to sweep the entire lair, and now the porters were proceeding to dismember and clean the corpses. Hanyeol decided to guard the area so that he could be on the lookout for more orcs and protect his subordinates. He climbed up to the floor of an abandoned building and scouted the area with binoculars and the scope of his assault rifle. If a monster appeared on the horizon, he would fire a grenade launcher shell at it from a distance. There were no more monsters in the area, and the subordinates didn't shirk their duties. Everything was clear, so Hanyeol decided to follow for a couple more minutes and return to his team. As he was about to leave, he heard an explosion in the other direction. Another team of hunters were also clearing out another nest of orcs. One of the monsters was stopped by a hunter with the tank ability with her shield, who was coming through. He was amazed when he saw this soldier as Lee Ga. Such a fragile girl was acting as an armor-piercing shield. With a special button, a blade would come out of her shield and pierce through the monster's belly. A few more monsters ran towards her, which was knocked down by a second shield maker. Then 2 more hunters, including Ga's friend, attacked the creatures with knives, chopping them apart. Along with them was a sniper who shot at the monsters from a distance, and managed to kill 2 while helping his comrades. Hanyeol was shocked to see the abilities of his new acquaintance, as he thought she worked as a hitman or a helper, and didn't realize that she was such a powerful tank. Ari began to call out to him, saying that they were already done. The professional porters were indeed performing their duties promptly and quickly. Hanyeol began to descend to his team. Meanwhile, the second group of hunters turned on their radar and began to look for the next lair. Ga was already very tired, but the commander asked her, didn't she really want to earn money? And then she had to suppress the weakness within her. The monsters were inside an abandoned factory. Choi Seung-biom and Lee Ari were cutting up the last of the monsters and stacking the containers in the truck. Hanyeol sat and watched the process, thinking that he would never get used to this. It was awkward for him to sit and do nothing while others were doing the hard work, but he was also too tired to work alone. When the guy offered to help them, they got nervous and looked at him like he was a leper, so the idea had to be abandoned. He decided to look at his skill level and asked Cabas to show him the status window. He was able to go up 5 levels, which showed that hunting alone was improving his abilities much better. He gained 35 new points and decided to distribute them equally. The hunter allocated 10 points each to strength, magic, and physique, and the remaining 5 points to agility. Hanyeol then noticed that although he had used the healing skillet frequently earlier, but now his level did not fluctuate from rank B. He even began to ponder if there were any wounded people in the area to heal them. After all, he needed to refine this particular skill to heal his father. Last time the healing had no effect on the black substance that was eating the man, but the son believed that if he improved the skill, he would be able to do something about the parasite. Suddenly, the ground shook, and there was an explosion in the distance behind a few buildings. Hanyeol remembered that Lee Jia's group was in that direction, and after telling the porters that he would be back soon, he ran in that direction to see if everything was all right. 30 minutes before, the team of hunters had started mopping up the lair located in the abandoned factory. Surprisingly, there were fewer orcs than the radar showed, and the group was able to deal with them with ease. The hunters asked the commander if the lair was really here, since they had only killed a couple of orcs. The captain replied that judging by the extent of the magic spread here, there was something much larger than a normal lair. It was all very strange. Based on the location the locator was showing, the source was in a warehouse building that was in front of them. One of the hunters volunteered to go check it out, and replied that he could handle it alone, as they were simple orcs, and he himself was more comfortable that way. Suddenly the source disappeared from the locator, and their comrade was suspiciously long gone. The traces of magic of the departed hunter named Un-jin disappeared, and afterward, the locator screen showed that something was moving at them at high speed. From behind the warehouse door, Un-jin's bleeding body flew towards them. He slammed lifelessly into the wall. Panic appeared among the hunters, and they grabbed their weapons. From the shadows of the room, an unusual orc slowly began to emerge in their direction. He was larger than his kin, with massive muscles and black skin, while the other orcs had dirty pink, brick-colored skin. While the commander was standing there trying to figure out what this thing was, a brunette friend of GA ran towards the monster. She tried to stab it, but the orc snatched the sword by the blade and easily split it in two. He then struck the girl's stomach with his clawed paw, and she followed her comrade, crashing into the wall, bleeding. It wasn't known if the hunters were unconscious or already dead, but their injuries were horrific. Ji-ah was gripped by panic and stupor. She looked at her injured friend, whose name was He-min, and felt very alone now. Panic attack and the trauma of loneliness gripped her brain, and she crouched down, waiting for death, no longer hoping for rescue, as she no longer wanted to live without her friend. The monster ran towards the girl, and then the second tank herd ran at him with a shield and shouted to her friend not to give up and continue to fight and fight. But it was no longer possible to reach the girl. The commander began to shoot from a machine gun in the direction of the enemy, shouting that he would not allow his subordinates to be killed, but the bullets ricocheted off the head of the beast. The commander and shield maker continued to fire at the monster. The captain spent almost all of his ammunition on the monster, but there were no wounds or scratches on it. 2 of the team members were dead, and the third had lost their fighting spirit. The 2 of them couldn't fight indefinitely, and something urgent had to be done. The commander decided to throw a smoke screen, and at that moment, escape. The hunter with the shield wanted to save the dead, but the commander in charge said it was more important to save their lives now. But once they decided that, they noticed that He-min was still breathing and alive. But the commander decided to go all the way and shouted a smokescreen command for everyone to cover their eyes. When the explosion happened, he and the hunter with the shield ran for the exit, but Ji-ah picked up her friend in her arms and headed for the upper floors along the corridor that was closer to the injured girl to get away faster. She hid and began to treat the girl's wounds, sure that the commander would come for them soon. But he went outside with another hunter, and when they noticed that GA wasn't with them, they decided not to follow her, knowing that she had decided to save her friend, and now they would both die, and the men weren't about to risk their lives. If those left in the building were killed, no one would turn them in for leaving the living to fend for themselves, and Ji-ah could report him for not wanting to save He-min. Meanwhile, the girl began to worry about why their comrades hadn't come back for them yet, and began to hear the monster starting to get closer. As she dragged the huntress, drops of blood dripped from her, forming a trail for the monster to follow. It was then that she decided to stand to the death, and grabbing her shield and sword, stood up, covering her friend with her back. The orc ran straight at her, and she successfully held on and fought off the attacks. But soon her shield was covered with dents and scratches. Her hand was shaking, and her weapon was hard to hold. Her strength was waning, and death was on her doorstep. Suddenly, Hanyeol was nearby and grabbed the monster with his hook cable, saying that according to the rules, hunters were not allowed to interfere with each other's hunting, but now he himself was making an exception. Hanyeol was restraining his arm with a cable, and Ji-ah asked him how did he end up here. The situation was more critical than the guy had anticipated. He had seen 2 types on the street who had abandoned the 2 girls and cowardly ran away, and he had come across the unusual footprints he had used to reach here. He decided to deal with the monster first, and told GA to stay back near his injured friend for now. At this time, the orc broke the chain and got out of duress. The guy was shocked at the cuteness of this uneasy monster. Hanyeol then began to fire at the creature with his assault rifle, but the ranged attacks had no effect on the monster. He asked Ji-ah to duck down and fired a projectile with the magic blast ability from his grenade launcher. Hanyeol blasted the monster. Black smoke spread around, and he was sure that he was able to do at least some damage to the orc. But the orc attacked out of the smoke at the guy and pushed the assault rifle out of his hands. There were no more weapons, and then the young man had no choice but to go into close combat. There wasn't a scratch on the orc, and it was clear that he was resistant to a certain type of attack. Hanyeol tossed up a hand grenade, and when it flew towards the monster, fired his pistol at it before summoning a coercion skill and throwing a hook behind the orc's scruff. The tip of the hook hooked into the soft skin covered by the spikes on its back, and then he struck with the chains, separating them and aiming them at different parts of the monster's body. He was delayed, and the count turned to a second to finish the orc in its weak spots. But the monster began to twitch, and Hanyeol might not have gotten there in time. At this time, GA ran at the monster from behind and stabbed at it with her shield so that it couldn't slip away from the hunter, and started shouting to Hanyeol to strike faster. But the monster spread its spikes and pushed the chain hooks out of its body, throwing the girl aside. At this moment, Hanyeol stuck his knife into the monster and began to press down on it until they reached a hole in the wall, beyond which was a cliff. The guy continued to jab at the enemy with his cold weapon and threw himself down with it. Using his coercion ability, he hooked his hook onto part of the wall and continued to hang in space on the cable and pulled the dagger out of the orc. The monster began to fall down from a high floor, which promised death on impact with the ground. Hanyeol climbed the cable back up to the floor and ran up to the weakened GA sitting against the wall, but the girl said she was fine and asked the healer to help his friend. The guy believed the girl about her condition and started treating Hee-min. Her rib was broken and almost pierced her lung, but the hunter was able to heal that. When he succeeded, he told this to Jia, who at first glance was sleeping with a peaceful smile. But in reality, her back had been pierced by a metal bar sticking out of the wall she had fallen on. Jia saved and protected her friend with all her might, giving her life for it. Hanyeol called for an ambulance and an emergency team from the Hunters Association. Jia was placed in a black bag and sent to the morgue. Hee-min woke up and shouted her friend's name, but the staff wouldn't let her see the deceased and took her to the hospital afterward. Hanyeol stood by his truck and berated himself for his weakness and for not being able to save the girl. Investigator Lee Ha-nul came up to him, and when he asked her what she was doing here, she said that when there were deaths of hunters, it was the association's jurisdiction. She asked the young man to follow her to testify as a witness. The investigator told him that the leader of the hunting team the deceased was a member of had been arrested. It seems that his colleagues suspected something wrong and reported him. The arrested man stated that he didn't know everything that had happened, but they would soon find out all the details. After a few hours, Hanyeol was finally let out of the main building of the Hunters Association. He was asked such a long list of questions as if he was a criminal, not a witness. But still, he felt guilty, as if he had been the main culprit in the death of GA. He wanted the detectives to punish the captain of their team, who had abandoned the girls to their fate, but realized that even with his imprisonment, peace of mind would not come. The porters came up to him and said that all the equipment had been turned in, and the bodies of the orcs had been handed over to the association. The young man thanked the helpers and apologized that they had to finish everything without him, but they replied that it was all right. They picked up the pipes of the black orc from the ground when it fell, and the association itself offered money for its carcass and asked to pick it up, which was extremely strange, since the association itself never asks anything from the hunters. And moreover, Hanyeol and his porters had not reported the monster. At this point, the team decided to part ways, and Hanyeol promised the guys to transfer the payment this very evening. Meanwhile, investigator Lee Ha-nul went into her Sunbae Sung-hoon's office to discuss the situation. She asked the chief investigator if he had read the report she sent him today. The man replied that it was a very interesting case. They decided that Hanyeol is a very uneasy hunter who gets caught in the middle of the most abnormal incidents. According to the research team's report, they searched the abandoned factory where the incident happened and found a gateway to another dimension in the warehouse. Also, the research team said that by comparing the orc's magic, it was found that it matched with the magic reaction of the other dimension gate. This meant that the orc came from a different dimension than his other kin, or had accidentally entered the gate and was infused with alien energy that caused him to mutate. But what also bothered the investigators was that Hanyeol's skills were completely inconsistent with his F rank, as he was able to single-handedly slay this dangerous atypical orc that a team of 5 D-ranked hunters couldn't handle. This guy was definitely hiding something, but they only had a hunch and no proof. Investigator Sung-hoon said that he let him give him a simplified test for a reason, and didn't think they would be able to discover the first clues about him so quickly. He allowed subordinate Ha-nul, from her authority, to conduct a real investigation regarding Hanyeol. Therefore, next time, she would have to bring him real evidence. Hanyeol returned home, where banana milk and a note were waiting for him. The good-natured neighbor had gone to her final exam and asked the guy in the note to hold his fists for her. He remembered how long ago his own final exams had been, and then asked Cabas to show him the status window. The milk fell out of his hands, and the guy found himself in a state of shock. His 22nd level had risen to 33 in just one foray into orcs. All skills rose to high levels, and the healing ability became Category M, which was the highest. Next, healing could not heal, and so 2 more initial rank F skills emerged from this ability, which were called Recovery and Enhanced Healing Power. This fission procedure was called Skill Enhancement, which was successful. The young boy asked for details about the new abilities, and the recovery skillet said that the effect of this power was to expend magic to cure external injuries, diseases, and get rid of impurities caused by magic. The boy got excited and asked the ego if he could heal his father with this power, to which Kabis replied that he probably could. Now they had hope. The company of creditors that Hanyeol was in debt to were preparing to move to a new location. A subordinate, addressing the boss named Younguk Youngnim, asked if they should definitely do it. Even though he may have stopped making contact, but don't you think it's overkill? Cheol-min asked. But Younguk answered him that it makes a lot of noise. But Cheol-min didn't understand why they had to move the office again, since they had done that recently on other debtors. But the boss asked him, did he really think he could stand a fight with an awakened man? The boss asked Cheol-min if his girlfriend really worked for the Hunters Association, and when he heard a positive answer, he demanded that his subordinate find out about the inner workings of the association through her. And then, Cheol-min couldn't believe that the superior really wanted to accept that hunter's order, knowing that if they found the right person, he would kill him. Their order, with the request to find the person, was the captain of the SW 5587 hunter team, who was suspended and stripped of his license. He wanted to find the man who had made a denunciation against him. The boss yelled at Cheol-min, but the man had a bad feeling about this assignment. Yubi left the apartment to head out again for another final exam. It was already quite cold outside, and even in her jacket she was freezing. There was a metal box near the threshold that kept out the cold, and on it was a sticker with a note on it, wishing Hanyeol to wish her to pass all her exams successfully, and to drink the contents of the box warm. Inside was a can of warm drink that the girl was able to warm her hands against. Since Hanyeol Oppa believed in her, she decided that she was obligated to pass the exams with flying colors. Meanwhile, a guy came to the hospital to visit his father. Nurse Kim asked the young man why he came in a classic black suit this time, to which the guy replied that he came straight from the funeral. He was invited to GA's funeral, and after seeing his girlfriend off on her last journey, he decided to try to save his father. He asked the nurse, under no circumstances, to let anyone into his father's room while he was there, and not to tell anyone about it. She asked him if his method of treatment was the reason for his dad's previous improvements in health, at which point Hanyeol said yes, but explained that he couldn't tell everything in detail yet. She agreed to help him, and promised that no one would enter the room, and trusted him completely. However, after he entered the room, she panicked a bit, because by making this promise, she had broken several lists of hospital rules and several points of medical law. Hanyeol took off his jacket and rolled up his sleeves, and after summoning Kabis, and attuned himself to activate and enhance the recovery skill. He concentrated mana on the fingertips of one hand and began to move it over his father's body. Contaminated mana has been detected in the object. Separation of the source of the contamination from the object's body is underway. Kabis spoke. Energetic white threads of energy began to extend from her fingertips and began to wrap around the black parasite that had sucked on Chun-sam's abdomen. There was an effect from the skillet, and it was as if it had formed the basis of an awakening skillet. He began to pull the parasite towards him, and its limbs began to gradually separate from the man. The creature began to squeak, and the large eye began to look from side to side in panic, fighting back. Nurse Kim was sitting at her desk, and one of the machines started beeping, indicating that something was wrong in one of the rooms, namely Lee Chun-sama's room, and then on automatic, she pressed the emergency button that gave a request for a doctor's help. But then she remembered that Hanyeol had asked her not to react in any way to whatever was going on in the room, and after contacting him, she apologized, saying that she had pressed the button accidentally, because at that time, the room started to light up with a help signal. Everything shut down, and Hanyeol continued his work, and channeling all the points he had earned into a new skill, he didn't let the creature absorb his mana, as he couldn't absorb all of it due to the large amount of it, and the hunter's strength didn't run out. He ripped the creature off, and it fell to the floor of the chamber. All indicators of his father's condition returned to normal. Hanyeol and Kabis bent over the monster with angry shadows and began to destroy it into pieces before this germ could transfer to someone else. The monster was completely destroyed, and at that moment, Chung Sam woke up and looked at his son. Chul-min went to the main building of the Hunters Association to meet his girlfriend and ask her about the inner workings of her job, but he kept feeling something wrong. Investigator Hanyeol stood outside the entrance of the Hunters Association and talked on the phone about the case concerning Lee Hanyeol. She didn't have any leads yet, but she continued to investigate and gave orders to her subordinates to look for as much information about him as possible. With her side vision, she noticed the female employee who was in charge of measuring Lee Hanyeol's magic. The young girl walked out of the building to the street because a young man, who turned out to be Cheol-min, called her. He said that he had a case for her, but he didn't want to discuss it here and asked her to go to a cafe with him. The policewoman noticed that she had seen this guy's face somewhere before, and he seemed suspicious. She ran his photo through the database on her tablet and found his file. Park Chul-nim worked at a reference agency as a loan officer. Hanyeol decided to visit the hospital again. While he was standing at Nurse Kim's front desk, he got a text from Yubi, who was excited about passing her exams. He was happy for his roommate and texted her his congratulations. Afterward, he asked the nurse how his father's condition was. The girl replied that his father was now in recovery. All the symptoms of the disease had abruptly disappeared, and so he attracted much interest from the doctors, who did not understand the genus of his disease, and for what reason it had receded. Nurse Kim kept her promise, and would not tell the doctors anything, so that they had nothing to do but call it a miracle. It had only been 3 days since Hanyeol had used the new recovery skill on his dad, and plans were already being discussed for his discharge. The guy was called by name, and when he turned around, he saw his daddy, who told him that he wanted to check out right away. Hanyeol told him that it was too early to think about discharge, and he hadn't fully recovered. But the man replied that he heard the doctors and nurses talking, and they were saying among themselves that the symptoms of the illness had passed, so he now had enough rehabilitation exercises. Chun Sam added that he would not be a burden to his son, but that he would live separately and help his son with his household chores, not disturbing him at his rented apartment, but trying to take care of him now. At this moment, Hanyeol remembered that throughout his dad's stay in the hospital, he had lied to him about working a stable office job. He didn't want his father to know that he was actually working as a hunter who was constantly risking his life, and that he could barely pay his debts on the rent for his apartment, and the room itself was crammed with various hunting equipment. However, it was dangerous to lie further, and he wanted to tell everything. But at that moment, the attending physician ran up to them and said that Mr. Lee would not let him check out so easily. He said that at this point, the patient was an important specimen for them to study the disease and its treatment, but after apologizing for the incorrect statement, he asked the man to stay again, so that the doctors could observe him, as this was the first time they had encountered such a thing. But Chun Sam said he didn't want to pay extra hospital bills, and the doctor promised that his next hospital stay would be at the facility's expense. After that, the man agreed to stay for another month. Hanyeol did not tell the truth about himself, and decided that in 1 month he should think of something, and first of all change his apartment. He received a text message on his phone from a contact, written down as, who asked in the letter to meet and have a drink together in the evening. They agreed to meet at 8 o'clock in the evening, and the guy who invited Hanyeol was late himself. He was the same age as the hunter, and he was also his best friend, who had a birthday today. They went to a diner where they drank soju and talked about what had happened to them since the last time they had seen each other, since they didn't see each other that often because of work and other things. The guy's name was Kim Sung-jin. He was a cheerful and very clingy friend. He asked Hanyeol how his father was doing, and then the guy told him about his father being discharged as soon as possible, but now he had a new problem as he needed more money to keep his father at home. The friend replied that he too was suffering from lack of money, and told about his situation. After retiring, his father opened a monster slaughter plant with his retirement money. Their business was going well, and he got a job with his father. But because of the TK Company, which was a large-scale network of monster slaughtering factories, their factory became chaotic. In order to monopolize their business in this area, they use various dirty tricks and force many factories around them to close down. It is rumored that they even hire gangsters to prevent their competitors from doing work. Moreover, they have started to offer much better conditions for hunters than others who supply the monsters' raw materials to the factories. They take away all the raw materials completely, depriving the other suppliers. Because of this, Sungjin's factory is suffering tremendous damage. They were not bankrupt, and the only thing they needed was to find a hunter who would contract with them to supply them with raw materials on a regular basis, and they would pay him very well, and the hunter's income would be more than if they were to give the raw materials to the association itself. He asked his friend if he had any such hunters in mind. Hanyeol didn't immediately digest what he had heard, but when he did, he said that there was one person in mind. When Sungjin asked who that person was, the young man told him that it was him. The friend laughed and told Hanyeol that he had learned how to make jokes during their separation. But he silently took out his license from his wallet and handed it to his friend. He read the information on the card and was shocked. His best friend had become a monster hunter. Yubi was sitting at home, and her mom started to call on the phone. She picked up the phone, and with a cheerful look, she asked her mom why she was calling. Her mom asked her about her exams, and the girl said that she had tested herself for the correct tests of an exam called Sunyin. And in the end, although she originally thought she had passed everything, the answers didn't match the correct ones. Her mother was upset and apologized for not being able to help her daughter in any way, but Yubi replied that it was okay, and she didn't want her mother to cry. They said goodbye, and the daughter asked her parent to take care of herself. After that, the girl herself cried as she wanted to go to university very badly, but now she won't be able to. Hanyeol was going on a long expedition while there was time before his father was discharged, and as he would not be at home for a long time, he decided to say goodbye to Yubi. He rang the bell and knocked at the door, but no one opened it for him, so he had to leave without any farewells. At this time, on the neighbor's desk, the enrollment forms for the porter team were lying on the neighbor's desk. Together with his team of porters, the boy went to the northern district of Chungcheong, in the city of Cheongju. It was a cordoned-off abandoned neighborhood consisting of a pile of ruins. The place where he had previously hunted orcs had been cordoned off by police and scientists to investigate the anomalous gate and search for mutated black orcs. So he needed to go to another lucrative hunting spot, and Sungjin, who they had contracted with, sent him to this area to hunt ants. He said that these monsters weren't particularly big, but that was a lie. Right now, they were fighting a giant insect that was at least 3 times bigger than themselves. They were in the very epicenter of the ant hole. Both porters were firing their assault rifles at the monster, distracting it, but it suddenly spat out a white substance from its jaws that looked like a spider's web. This sticky liquid glued Ari's hands to her body, and then the ant pulled the captured victim towards itself. At this moment, Hanyeol activated the coercion and shouted for the girl to hold on for a bit. The hook tore the web, and the girl freed herself from the restraints, falling right into Seongbom's arms. The guy started to ask his partner if she was all right and if she had hurt herself, but the girl answered inaudibly, as she was very embarrassed because the way Seongbiom had caught her looked very cool. She began to look at her partner differently, and she thought he looked especially cute today. The ant pointed its claw-like limb in their direction, and the stretcher-bearers were saved by the commander, who aimed a shell from a grenade launcher at the monster. After the explosion, the ant fell to the ground, weakening, and taking this opportunity, the hunter called up the coercion skill again and bound all of the arthropod's legs, causing it to fall immobilized and flat on its back. Hanyeol apologized to the bearers that he had failed to draw the monster's attention to himself. Then together, they finished off the ant to the end. Hanyeol decided that when he finished this outing, he would definitely crack Sungjin on the head for lying, and they could arrive, due to the deception about the size of the monsters, unprepared. The bearers began to clean the crystals out of the ant's body, and then chopped it into pieces. Taesu Ajoshi arrived with a large truck, into which the porters began to load all the goods. Hanyeol wanted to earn as much money as possible before his father was discharged, so they decided to go on a hunting trip in the form of a camping trip, not returning home for about half a month. Ari and Seongbom also needed money, so they agreed to be with him on the expedition for 2 weeks. Manager Taesu himself volunteered to help without pay, coming by car every night and picking up their goods and delivering them to Seongjin's factory. Taesu drove away, and Hanyeol wished him a safe journey. It was time to set up camp, but when the porters began to sort out all the equipment, they found out that when they had packed all the goods, they had put only one double tent instead of 3 single tents. Hanyeol was upset and told the porters to sleep in the tent, as they were tired enough today because of him, and were at risk because of their ignorance of the enemy. He himself lay down in his sleeping bag outside. Seongbom and Ari lay in separate sleeping bags, but they were very awkward in each other's presence, as there was a budding sympathy between them, and being around each other in such an environment was exciting. The girl thanked the guy for catching her today, and the guy nervously replied that it was nothing, but in his thoughts, he thought that the girl was reacting differently than usual. Ari herself was in her thoughts, begging Hanyeol to save them from this tension and deal with the tents. Meanwhile, the commander was freezing and sneezing in the cold night. The association worker who was Cheol-min's girlfriend broke into the record storage room. The worker in the records room asked for her ID card. She showed it, at which point the man asked what errand she had come on. The girl replied that investigator Lee Ha-nul asked her to deliver the materials. Believing this, the employee let her through. She started walking between the shelves of the archive looking for a row labeled 7B3. She found a computer with digitized information and inserted a flash drive to copy the files she needed. She was very afraid of catching someone's eye and asked the download to go faster. When everything was copied and she pulled out the flash drive, she was grabbed by the shoulder. The girl turned around in fear and saw investigator Lee Ha-nul. She told the girl with a smile that she didn't expect to meet her here, and then the girl, realizing that it was an ambush, confessed to what she had done, giving the flash drive back to the policewoman. At the request of her young man, stealing the association's inside information. "You are really fearless," said the investigator. After Hanyeol saw Cheol-min last time, she suspected something wrong and kept a surveillance for a few days. She couldn't believe that he could pull off such a scam. The information he asked her to steal contained a case about a hunter from SW 5587 group who had lost his license due to Lee Hanyeol's denunciation. The girl asked pitifully, what would happen to her now? And then the investigator thought that if she reported the incident to her superiors, then the whole archive would be checked, and an investigation into the information leak would begin. Then Hanyeol's acquaintances would get wind of it and start digging up the bottom where they could find evidence on him that the police would miss. In order to continue following Hanyeol, they would have to turn a blind eye, and Hanyeol said that the employee would not be punished, but instead, she would have to fulfill her assignment. They didn't notice that they were talking right under the lens of the hidden camera. Work was boiling in the anthole. It was still early in the day, and the hunter and the 2 porters had already killed a bunch of monsters. This was the 7th day of the hunt, and they had already mastered how to kill them faster and easier. Hanyeol and Seongbum killed another ant and asked Ari to drag it to the others, but the girls said they didn't have room to put it. Then the commander realized that they had caught too many, and maybe the whole catch wouldn't fit in one truck, but there was no connection on the phone to call Taesu and ask him to bring another truck. And there was still plenty of time before he arrived, and Ri and Seongbom were already sick and exhausted from the daily battles with ants, eating half-finished meals, and sleeping in uncomfortable tents. He didn't know what to do to occupy the rest of the day, so he suggested that the porters go to town today and rest properly. Hanyeol's phone was dead, so he asked for Seongbom's phone, and while they were finishing the preparations with the corpses, he was able to reach Taesu, who said that he would deal with the dead ants left in the field by himself, and they could all go about their business. So now the guys didn't have to drag them to the common pile and cut them up, and they could leave, having agreed to meet together the next day at 8 in the morning. Relaxed, the porters agreed to go somewhere together, and said goodbye to the commander. He noticed that the awkwardness between them had disappeared, and they had become very close over the past 7 days. He himself decided to go to rest in a public bathhouse with a sauna, where they provided overnight accommodation, because it was quite a long drive from home. He had not taken a full shower for a long time, so he chose the bathhouse instead of a hotel. After resting, he asked his host to give him another siki, a traditional sweet drink, and after lying down, he decided to sit on his phone, which he was finally able to charge. Turning it on, he saw 27 missed calls from his father, and now it was ringing again. The young man had completely forgotten about him and had to lie on the fly that he was now on a business trip and had a lot of things to do. that there was no time for calls. His father believed the lie and said goodbye to his son. Hanyeol regretted that instead of telling the truth, he lied more and more. Then he saw that Sung-jin also had a few missed calls, and he started calling him too. The guy answered the phone, and his friend started yelling at him that he had allegedly lied to him about working alone, because it was impossible to bring in a truck full of ants every day. His workers couldn't get everything cut in time and had to stay after hours, all complaining about the amount of work and being very tired. Hanyeol awkwardly began to make excuses that he was really working alone with only 2 porters, and to be honest, from the next day, 2 trucks would be coming in. Sung-jin was shocked as his factory wasn't ready for such a volume of raw materials. That was why they wanted a contract with just 1 hunter. But he didn't think that his friend was so powerful and strong that he could kill so many. But after he calmed down, he thanked his friend, because he was afraid that his factory would go bankrupt without resources. But now they can sleep well. And despite the workload, the most important thing is that now they have profit and stability. At this time, Cheol-min handed the flash drive he received from the girl to the boss, and he opened a file that said that the informer of the hunter Kang Tae-il was Lee Hanyeol. The situation was becoming more and more interesting, and he ordered a subordinate to inform the customer who had denounced him to the association. He was satisfied that the culprit turned out to be his old debtor. Another week passed, and finally the ant hunt was over. Henri said that when they first started the hunt, she didn't think they would be able to manage with just the 3 of them. Yet everything went more or less well. It was only in the last few days that she had gotten a big scare of her life, when they had wrongly disturbed a nest of insects, and they had run at them in a big stream. But Hanyeol shot a grenade at them and saved the girl. They had the biggest catch that day, and they loaded up 3 whole cars. The team said goodbye to each other, and Hanyeol decided to pay the porters their bonuses, because they deserved it, because they risked their lives for him every day, and he himself had often gotten into dangerous situations as a porter in the past, for which he had not been paid. He returned to his apartment and noticed that Yubi had no lights in the windows. At first he wondered where she might be, but then he remembered that now she didn't have to spend her evenings memorizing lessons and could have fun and go out before the start of the university school year. He opened the door and sprinted over to the bed. Hanyeol was about to wash his face and get a good night's sleep, but at that moment, Sung-jin started calling him on his phone. The hunter answered the call, and his friend called him for a drink. Hanyeol wanted to refuse, but Sung-jin said that he was going to give him the check for the money he had earned from supplying ants to the factory when they met, and if they didn't meet, he would have to give it to him sometime later. Hanyeol really wanted to get the money as soon as possible, so overcoming his fatigue, he agreed to the meeting. After the first drink, he said enthusiastically that there was nothing better than alcohol after a hard day's work. His friend laughed and reminded him that he didn't want to come. In response, Hanyeol remarked that Sung-jin had gotten away from work himself, since the workers at his factory were processing meat even at night. He gave the hunter a check for 80 million won and said that it was for the first shipment, but since he had been taking 2 or 3 trucks to the factory for the past week, the second check would be about 150 million won. The young man was shocked and didn't expect such a large amount of money, and then he shared his joy with his friend that he could finally pay off all his debts and buy an apartment. Sung-jin asked why his friend was in debt, and he said that he had borrowed money from a private company to pay off his father's hospital bills and had gotten into debt. But now the creditors weren't returning his calls, and when he went to their office, he found that they had moved to an unknown location. Sung-jin asked if the creditor was a man named Lee Young-guk, and when he heard his friend answer in the affirmative, he told his story. His father had once taken out a loan from him. He managed to collect the money quickly and was about to pay it back, and then those types also stopped replying and moved out of the office. They went underground, and while they were not heard from, the interest began to accumulate and build up, but eventually he and his father found their hideout and were able to pay everything off without interest. Sung-jin found the address of the old hideout in his phone and gave it to his friend, since they could hide there again, and then asked what the friend was going to do. Hanyeol replied that he would teach those rascals a lesson properly. Lee Young-guk sat in the office and waited for Cheol-min to bring the hunter. There was a knock on the door, and he thought it was a subordinate who couldn't open the door for some reason. He got up to open the door, but it was suddenly kicked open, and Hanyeol was on the doorstep. The creditor began to ask the man who had come in how he knew of their location. Hanyeol replied that they had been trying to cheat one of his friends, and he had ratted them out to him. The man got angry and swung his fist at the guy, but the man grabbed his fist with his palm and stopped him. The man remembered he was fighting an awakened man and regretted it. The hunter used mana and channeled it into his palm, causing the man to be pushed aside and his arm to ache. The guy reminded him that if he went to complain, no violence had been used on him. It was only self-defense. Hanyeol threw an envelope on the floor with 30 million won, which was half of the debt, and said he'd pay the other half next week, so they should reopen the account because he didn't want to go back to that place. Lastly, he threatened that if they do force him to come here again, young Gook won't get off with one hand. After a while, Cheol-min came back and saw their office door kicked in and the boss's arm was injured. He brought a hunter with him, and the creditor informed him that if he still wanted to know who reported him to the Hunters Association, he had to fulfill one request of theirs first. And the hunter agreed. 20 minutes before, investigator Hanyeol had sat in ambush in her car, watching the accounts payable office to see why they needed information about Hanyeol's report. She had been there for 6 days already, and she was already regretting what she had done, but she couldn't shift the responsibility for her mess onto someone else. It would be good to set up a USB that contained stolen data, a location tracking program to find out who actually stole the information. She couldn't find any leads yet. At this time, from the car window, she saw Hanyeol walking towards the office, and the girl got out of the car and decided to follow him. She didn't understand why he was talking to young Gook about another case, and apparently the hunter didn't know about the information about him. And then he hit the civilian and left. The girl returned to the car and decided to add this incident of violence to his case. And afterward, she got a call from the information department. Investigator Lee Han-nul, while collecting data on Hunter Lee Hanyeol, something interesting was found. The subordinate began his report. About a week before Lee Hanyeol registered with the Hunters Association, he suddenly deposited cash amounting to 8 million won into his bank account. However, according to the information, 2 days before, Lee Hanyeol himself had stopped working at the factory after beating up a supervisor. The investigator replied that it was not a cash severance pay. Maybe he pulled some money tricks, or borrowed money from acquaintances or relatives. But the information officer replied that at first they thought the same thing, but afterward they found out another fact about the suspect. The subordinate sent the data to the police officer's tablet and asked her to open it. There was a photo of Hanyeol driving a car at a checkpoint. This photo was taken from the surveillance cameras at the field checkpoint in Seokcho City, 2 days before the cash contribution. Information officers checked the records of porters who went out to work that day, but Lee Hanyeol did not apply for one hunting group. Based on the investigation, they do not know how he managed to get through the checkpoint, but it seems that Lee Hanyeol was conducting illegal hunting in the field that day. They also thought there was a high possibility that he had sold the corpses of monsters on the black market and thus collected a sum of money. The investigator replied that if it was true, then it was possible that Lee Hanyeol had also given them false information about the time he became awakened. The subordinate asked whether to prepare an arrest warrant for the suspect. But at that moment, Hanyeol noticed Cheol-min heading into the office, along with suspended hunter Kang Tae-il. She ordered not to appoint a warrant yet, as there was one piece of unresolved evidence left. A week had passed since then. Hanyeol packed up all his belongings and said goodbye to the rented studio apartment he had lived in for quite some time. After leaving his former home, he wanted to say goodbye to Yubi, but she wasn't in her apartment, and she stopped responding to his texts a long time ago. According to the manager, she packed a bag and left 3 weeks ago and hasn't returned since. The guy was worried about the schoolgirl and hoped she was okay. It was a shame to move without saying goodbye to her. He moved into a new building and carried all the boxes alone. He considered himself lucky to be able to rent a spacious and clean apartment for only 150 million won. This amount was quite a budget for such an apartment, and was due to the fact that the owner had to leave urgently for work in America. Moreover, the landlord said that he could make a down payment on the rent after the move was over, so the terms were the best and most favorable. All that remained was to bring my father. At that moment, a call came in on the phone from Nurse Kim. The guy answered, and the girl informed him that his father was missing. Without listening all the way, Hanyeol ran to the hospital. The girl explained that someone had started a fire on the side of the ward door, and while the evacuation was announced and the patients were being escorted out, no one noticed his father had been kidnapped through the broken window. It happened about an hour ago. The guy's cell phone started ringing with Lee Young-guk, whose contact was listed under the name Freak. The young man asked what the guy was calling him for, but the man replied to not be so relaxed. The lender sent the video to the guy and asked him to watch it now. The video showed his father, with his eyes bound, headphones in his ears, and his mouth taped shut with duct tape. Hanyeol asked what were they doing to his father. The man replied that his father was very lonely in the ward, so they took him away to brighten up the company, and if the guy wanted him back, he had to pay 150 million won, although maybe they should have asked for a larger amount from him, since he was apparently a rich hunter. Young-guk openly mocked and sarcastic to the unfortunate debtor, and retaliated out of personal grudges. He told the guy not to do anything stupid, and to come back the next day with the money, or else he would find a way to punish the guy, because he used to work in the organization in the Law and Order Department. It was the evening of the next day, and as agreed, Hanyeol arrived at the right place at 8 o'clock with a bag of money. Lee Young-guk greeted the hunter, and the man immediately demanded to see where his father was. The man snapped his fingers in a sign of command, and Chul-min brought Hanyeol's dad tied to a chair. He was no longer wearing headphones, but his eyes and mouth were still closed. The son called out to his dad and he started yelling back at him, causing the duct tape to peel away from his mouth. He told Hanyeol that he didn't understand what was going on. Then it came to Young-guk's attention that all this time Hanyeol had been lying to his father about his business. He asked the hostage what he knew about his son, and the man replied that his son worked in the office of a large company. The creditor laughed and said that when he went into the hospital, his son had taken out a private loan from them to pay off the hospital bills, but ordinary work didn't help repay the large sums, so he risked his life and went to work as a porter, and at the same time worked in a factory chopping up monster carcasses. Then he suddenly became awakened and left his job as a porter and became a hunter, and all the while he was fighting monsters, and didn't tell him about it so he wouldn't worry about his son. Hanyeol started yelling at Lee Young-guk to stay out of it and just take his money. He replied that he didn't trust the hunter and asked him to throw the bag on the floor and move a distance away, at which point the young man threw the bag containing the entire 150 million that was for the apartment rent directly at Lee Young-guk, causing him to fall to the floor. Then he activated his awakening skill and threw the rope he had taken from the vault and hidden under a twist at Chul-min, who was standing next to his father. But the rope was knocked away by a bullet, and then a second bullet whizzed by Hanyeol's cheek. Out of the shadows came the 3 hunters he had once denounced. The commander scolded his subordinate not to shoot so immediately, or else the kill wouldn't be as interesting. Hanyeol realized that money alone would not do the trick, and now it would be a battle to the death. The captain of the hunting party told him that he was the reason why they had lost their livelihood, and he had ruined their lives, so they would punish him. Awakened remembered that these hunters were rank E, and though he had only worked with them a couple times, he remembered that their skills were quite strong. He drew his knife and began to fend off the enemy's sword attacks. Each of them concentrated their mana on their weapons. Kang Tae-il wanted to hit Hanyeol's face with his fist, but he managed to dodge, but then he threw another punch, and the guy fell to the floor. At this moment, a girl from the squad approached him, with her mana concentrated into a large energy ball. All the while her comrades were distracting the enemy, she had been accumulating mana, and directed the orb at him, telling him he was done for, and summoning a skill called Fire Thrust. The orb was about to reach the young man, but suddenly there was a familiar female voice calling the ability Counterspell. The sphere dissolved into thin air, and the space was filled with green-colored mana. Yeah, in addition to stealing the association's information and kidnapping a peaceful citizen, the awakened ones who had their licenses taken away are using their skills not on monsters, but on humans. I'm speechless. Investigator Lee Hanyeol said, unsheathing her hunter's sword. In accordance with the special law on the disposition of awakened ones, I, the investigator of the Hunter Association Police Department, Lee Hanyeol, will immediately arrest you at the scene of the crime. The investigator blamed herself for what had happened. If she had arrested Lee Young-guk and the hunters a week ago, or if she hadn't allowed the information about Lee Hanyeol to be passed on, none of this would be happening now. She told Hanyeol that even though she disliked him, they should fight together against the criminals now. She sincerely wanted to make things right. Kang Tae-il called Yo-guk a scumbag for being the reason for the leak, and the police had been following them the whole time. The creditor was in a panic and realized that relying on Chul-min's girlfriend was reckless. The threat of arrest didn't scare the hunters, and they decided to kill the investigator, who arrived without backup. Tae-il attacked the girl with his sword, and she began to repel his attacks with hers. At this time, a sniper was aiming a gun behind her back, ready to shoot, but at that moment, his gun was shattered by the impact of Hanyeol's chain. The creditors grabbed Hanyeol's father and ran outside. The sniper started hitting the guy with his fists, but he dodged the attacks, and then the girl hunter started shooting firebolts, streams of solar energy, in his direction. The investigator neutralized the magical attacks with a counterspell, and then commanded Hanyeol to run up to her. He stood beside her, and she applied the binding skill, touching the floor. The ground crackled, and the hunter's legs were bound with green strands of mana. Hanyeol said she would detain them, and now the boy should run after the bandits, who were about to take his father away. The young man obeyed and ran for the exit, trusting the investigator and hoping she could handle the hunters alone. At this time, Chul-min was starting his car, which had stalled. He asked his boss what they should do now, and he said that they would take the hostage and the money back to the office and then lay low, and as soon as things calmed down, they would go overseas. The subordinate then asked what they would do with Chun-sam then, and Young-guk said they would roll him in concrete as originally planned. Hanyeol grabbed Young-guk's chain with his coercion skill and said, "They're not going anywhere." The hunters decided that the investigator from the Hunters Association was a weak opponent for them, especially since they were winning in numbers of 3 against 1. Before catching up with the others, the commander ordered the others to stop Lee Ha-nul, and the sniper fired a gas shell. Black smoke spread around the girl, and when she coughed and it dissipated, she said that it was mean. She then noticed that there were already 2 people standing in front of her and missing the leader of the group. They started to turn around looking for him, at which point the sniper attacked her, telling her to look at him, and he was her opponent. Meanwhile, Lee Hanyeol was holding Young-guk in his rope, preventing him from escaping. He heard the sound of an explosion from the smokescreen and turned towards the noise. Out of nowhere, a knife flew towards him and slammed into the ground behind the guy. Kang Tae-il stepped out of the building and annoyingly noticed that he had missed. The hunter started yelling at the creditor that he was the reason they were in such shit, and therefore he would get rid of him as well. Young-guk didn't expect such a setup. By this time, Hanyeol had found a metal rebar and told his enemy to cut his tongue. The young man attacked the hunter with his sword, wishing that he would die. And at this time, the creditor told his creditor not to stand on a pole. The guys started fighting, and Hanyeol noticed that the moneylenders were about to run away. He needed to stop them immediately. At that moment, Tae-il slammed him into the wall and then summoned mana and channeled it into his sword to finish off the awakened man. But Hanyeol used his speed and ran around the enemy and attacked him from the side. He also summoned mana, and the 2 magic weapons collided with each other. Hanyeol struck the man's stomach with the fist of his free mana arm, and when the man bent down, he struck him from above with the armature. He summoned Kabis and asked to see the characterization panel. He had 85 points accumulated, and asked her to channel them all into strength and agility. He was seething with anger and rage for his father, and so many problems, and he couldn't stop now, and started hammering the guy with a metal bar until he bled, until he stopped breathing. Now it was left to deal with Young-guk and Chul-min. He turned toward them and saw the head of the accounts payable office grab his bound father and put a knife to his throat, lifted from the ground. He demanded that the guy put the weapon down on the ground, or he would immediately slit the hostage's throat. Hanyeol obeyed and let go of the rebar. At that moment, the street was filled with a bright light. It was the headlights of the helicopter that flew toward them. From the loudspeaker, they were told that they were surrounded and should release the hostage immediately. While Young-guk was distracted, Hanyeol felt that this was his moment, and he must not let it go. He summoned his coercive power and slammed the chain against the man. The palm holding the knife fell to the ground helplessly. The man screamed in shock and pain, clutching the place where his hand had been cut off. The police arrested the 3 hunters and the 2 creditors, one of whom was first sent to the hospital to treat the severed hand. Lee Chun-sam was taken by ambulance back to the hospital, as he needed rest after such a shock. Hanyeol wanted to apologize to his father and explain everything, but he said he would listen to him later when he met him. But now he didn't want to talk. Hanyeol saw his father off and approached investigator Lee Ha-nul and thanked her for her help. She smiled back and handcuffed him. The guy was shocked, and the girl said he was arrested on suspicion of violating the special law of the Awakened Ones. Hanyeol sat in the interrogation room, once again explaining the situation with the photo taken at the checkpoint when he didn't have a license yet. He refused to talk, lying a lot. However, investigator Ha-nul was confident that he would crack soon. The chief investigator felt sorry for the awakened man who was taken away under arrest immediately after attempting to threaten his father's life. The two police officers watched the interrogation through the tinted glass and had no way of connecting all the evidence and the incident that had occurred. According to the testimony of Kang Tae-il and the other hunters, they did this because they had a grudge against Lee Hanyeol, who had denounced them to the association. Moreover, the information was given to them by Lee Young-guk. There was a question. How could just some unfortunate creditor steal the association's data? The chief investigator didn't know the answer, and there was no word about it in investigator Lee Ha-nul's report either. An unknown number sent a video message to the police officer's phone. Kang Sung-hoon went out into the hallway and watched the file sent. It showed Ha-nul talking to a female employee in the archives, allowing her to take the flash drive with information about Hanyeol's denunciation of Tae-il. Sung-hoon confronted the person who sent the text message, who turned out to be Tae-soo's manager. The police officer asked how he was able to find the camera footage, to which the man replied that he'd been working for the association for years and had a knack for this kind of thing. And moreover, the current security cameras can even record sound, so he could hear the entire dialogue on the tape. Tae-soo then asked, since when had the association become a body that turned a blind eye to leaks of personal information, and by granting privileges to a hunter, then secretly digging up on him? He warned the investigator that if people found out about everything soon, there would be a major uproar. The investigator asked if the man was threatening him, but Tae-soo said he wasn't that bold. He just wanted to make a deal. He offered to give up the USB containing the original video shown, but in return, they would drop all charges against Lee Hanyeol. The cop asked if the man knew who he was messing with, but Tae-soo knew Hanyeol, and that he wouldn't have done such a thing if not for the circumstances. He explained that he had a long-standing affection for the guy, and that's why he wanted to help him. Sung-hoon himself wanted to save his assistant Ha-nul and avoid being punished by his department. He agreed to the deal, and when he went back to the inspection room, he ordered the charges against Lee Hanyeol to be dropped and let him go, and asked the investigator Lee Ha-nul to come to his office later. The young hunter was able to return home and complained about his fate, that first he was arrested and then quietly released, which caused him a lot of stress. He felt that he would still return to the jail cell once all the evidence and suspicion had gained ground and weight. He flopped down on the bed and remembered that after he was released, before he left, they had measured his mana level again, and he was now a rank E hunter, a result several times higher than before, and he had to explain to the staff member that he had a hidden mana accumulation skill that he supposedly didn't know about either. The dark voice from his subconscious was curious about the new rank and the guy's abilities. Hanyeol tried not to worry about what had happened and told himself that everything was fine now. But the voice was telling him not to flatter himself. He got up to wash his face and told himself that now all the enemies had been caught and his father had been saved. But the voice told him that it was not to his credit. Other men had done it. The memories of the death of the huntress he had failed to heal and of the knife being held to his father's throat flashed before his eyes. The voice said that in all that time, he hadn't been able to keep anyone safe, and it was his weakness that was to blame. Hanyeol then smashed the mirror with his fist and replied that this was not true, and he would definitely become stronger. By any means and ways, he must nurture his strength. The entity behind him looked at this with satisfied yellow eyes and smirked a fanged smile. It had blue hair and horns like the young man's ego, but emanated a demonic aura. That voice called the hunter an interesting toy. UB was in a military training camp, where newcomers were trained to be stretcher bearers, under very harsh conditions. The camp was called Cradle of Country Defense, where the main site was a field test, where soldiers were trained to shoot according to certain rules. The speaker was told to set up his weapon for a single shot, and then given the command to begin. Each of the students began firing their rifles at targets, and then they began to announce the shooting zones that were clear. After naming all 3 zones, the students were free to go. UUB, dressed in camouflage and helmet, was finally happy to finish the task, and thought about how Hanyeol was doing. Meanwhile, the young man came to see his father's discharge. He was scared to meet his father, who had been captured because of him, and was also scared to look him in the eye when all the lies of years had come out. They made their way to the apartment in silence, and Chun-sam noticed that the house was new, as all the furniture looked like it had been recently purchased. The son was embarrassed, so he replied that he had indeed moved in recently, and afterward began to apologize for all the deception. But his father told him that he didn't need to apologize, and apologized for having forced his son to make such sacrifices with his illness. He was initially aware of the fact that his son did not work in the office of a large company. At first he wanted to ask him why he had lied, but afterward, he answered his own question. Hanyeol had taken on a difficult job that he didn't want to tell him about, so as not to cause unnecessary worry, and his father was grateful for it, but at the same time, he felt guilty. Both men cried and hugged each other tightly, and then began eating apples while sitting on the couch. Chun-sam said that he couldn't believe that his son was a talented hunter, and Hanyeol asked how his dad had guessed the deception after all. The man replied that he had once come to see him at the hospital very unkempt, and then told him that he would go to an off-site meeting. No one working in a prestigious company went to client meetings like that. The guy was embarrassed that he was caught doing such a small thing. Chun-sam then stood up, and said that he had arranged for his friends to meet up and have a drink in honor of the discharge, and then left, saying goodbye until the evening. Hanyeol began to clean the apartment. He put the books on the shelves in the order in which they had stood in his previous apartment. Among his books, he found one unfamiliar one that he had no memory of. It had a hexagonal star on the brown cover, and no title. He opened the first page and saw English words, not immediately realizing it was Latin. He began to read the text, which sounded like an incantation, and with each new word spoken, it was as if he was falling into a trance. Cabis noticed that something was going on with her master, and asked him to drop the book, but it was too late. He cast a spell that sounded like a summons to the devil. Lord Satan Astaroth to manifest this I respectfully. Lord Satan, may you deem me worthy father. At this moment, Hanyeol regained consciousness, and found himself in a black space. He didn't realize where he was, as he had been in his room a moment ago. A huge red eye with a narrow pupil, like a snake or a cat, appeared in front of him, and began to press on his head with a powerful energy stream, from which the young man grabbed his head. The vibrations were breaking him, and he wanted it to stop. The entity licked herself, and said that perhaps she was overdoing it, and if this kept up, her toy would break before the game started. She snapped her fingers, and the eye disappeared, then walked over to the guy. The horned girl, dressed in a black dress with a neckline at her feet, and a red eye, smaller than the one that had been a moment ago in the empty space, on her chest, told the guy to call her Astaroth.